Call this regular meeting of the West Dallas West Milwaukee School District to order, please. If we could please rise for the pledge. Mr. Sikich, would you kindly lead us?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Sikich. Could we do the roll call, please, Suzette?
Mr. Schultz.
Present.
Mr. Ustruck.
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser is excused. Mr. Keller.
Here.
Ms. Klug.
Here.
Mrs. Justin.
Here.
Mr. Sikich.
Present.
Mr. Lee.
Here.
And President Emmons.
Here. A proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Do we have any additions or modifications to tonight's agenda?
I have no changes.
Board members? We'll then move on to our public comment section of the evening. A couple of ground rules before we start, just because the room is pretty full this evening. We would be using the chat feature inside of Zoom to register for public comment. If you are in the meeting remotely, you could please list your name in the chat. That is the order in which you will be called. As a reminder, you have up to 3 minutes to address the board. Please list your name and address first, and once you've done that, then your timer will start. We will count you down at about 30 seconds remaining of your 3 minutes. We do have some members in the audience here too, which we will go once we've gone through the people on the Zoom. Just as a reminder, the board will not respond to public comments during the meeting itself. So at this time, if you'd like to make sure that your name is in the chat, we will go ahead and start calling for public comments. Okay, we will get started then. Jennifer Paulus.
Jennifer Paulus, 2034 South 95th Street, West Dallas. I spoke a couple weeks ago at the meeting, and I just wanted to speak again because I feel so strongly that it is time for the kids to get back. I realize Dr. Lexman has an ulterior motive and he's prolonging this process, and I'm just disgusted with it. Our kids need to be back in person. These metrics have been met. We can't put this off until April 8th. I'm a teacher in a neighboring district to West Dallas. We've been back since October. We've had no mass outbreaks in our schools from elementary all the way up to our high school related to COVID. We've been back safe. Mitigation has worked. There is absolutely no reason these students shouldn't be back. It is taking an academic toll on my child. It is taking an emotional toll on my child. The kids need to be back. The metrics have been met. There's absolutely no reason that the kids shouldn't be back. It's taking a toll on the teachers want these kids back in the classroom. The work's huge. She's falling behind. She's not making the academic gains that she should. I'm so disgusted with this district. The kids need to be back. There's no reason they shouldn't. Metrics have been met. There's research out there that shows that schools are not passing COVID around as long as we have good mitigation, which it seems like West Dallas does. I don't understand why we're not returning our kids. The metrics are met. We said a week once metrics were met, they should be back in school way before April 8th. And I want the board to act. You guys, the vote comes down to you as our board members. And if you're not going to be the voice for our kids, then I don't know who will. But the toll that this takes on our kids and what this is doing to our students, somebody has to speak up and stand up for the kids and get them back in school. And I hope tonight that you don't let this go to April 8th and you get these kids back in school, because this is what they need. And that's all.
Thank you. Michael May.
Good evening, board members. First of all, I want to thank you. I think you guys have actually done a fine job with how things have gone, following the science and following the protocol. So thank you so much for what you've done so far. it does seem from the numbers, it is time to get kids back in school. And I understand that that is the plan and the intent. I do have a couple of questions, and it relates to in-person versus virtual learning moving forward. We've heard that in-person teachers may not be the same as the virtual teachers moving forward, particularly for elementary students. And my concern with that is, well, one, I think the teachers have been doing well so far with about 2/3 of their students being home doing virtual on any given day and 1/3 in the classroom. If we see closer to 80 to 90% in the classroom, the remaining 10 to, I can't remember the first number I said, so 10 to 15%, if they stay virtual, why wouldn't they be able to stay with the same teacher? One of the concerns with that is we have a fifth grader, and we want him to be able to finish out Walker Elementary with his teacher and with his classmates. And if he chooses to go virtual, we'd like to have that option. The other concern I have is if the teachers are going to be different for in-person versus virtual, what happens if the in-person teacher has some students who have to be quarantined? Do they then get kicked to a virtual teacher, or are they still going to be on virtually with their in-person teacher? It just seems to be some contradictions there. Again, I'd really appreciate it if we can keep those students who choose to be virtual with their teachers who are teaching in person. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Darling.
11037 West McGuanago Drive. To me, tonight's vote should be an easy one for all of you. We clearly have seen that hybrid is working. Since we've moved to that, if we're gonna offer, we're offering hybrid, and if we go to full time in person, it's my understanding too from the last meeting that we still have to offer full virtual. Last meeting too, nearly 100% of the teachers with the absences seems to be not a problem. And actually, to quote Marty from last one, it was actually smaller than projected. So I'm guessing then with that protocols are in place. Teachers want to come back. Clearly, kids are wanting to come back. I know that mine too are excited about the two, looking forward to returning more days. It's been said too already tonight now that we're below transmission rates. I don't understand why we're declining any further than we need to. As far as moving further back into April, to me, that just doesn't make any sense. It shouldn't require that much time. It should be a week, 2 weeks tops. We should be able to have this figured out. We already have protocols in place. Keep those, and you add on the population into the mix. The CDC is suggesting it, and we're still offering the 100% virtual if that's correct. So I really don't see a problem with it. Kids are known to have the lowest transmission rates. Sports, flight attendants, mail, delivery, disposal, daycares, other districts, medical outfits, dentists, retailers, clerks, waiters and waitresses, everyone else is making this work. It's time for us to make it work. And we've shown that it has worked. So I don't understand the question. And then I just talked to my aunt too, who's out in San Francisco and a teacher, and word is that their district is also going full open first week of April. So if some place like San Francisco can do this, I have no idea why we can't. I've also, I'm not going to say names, but I've spoken with several teachers now, office personnel at one location, and coaches also. And these conversations has happened out in public areas, whether it's a restaurant, a bar, or a retail location. They've happened at all three. Different people.
30 seconds.
Okay. They're saying too that they prefer to be back in play. But unfortunately though, it's on the board. So with everything stated, all the information that we have, there should be no reason why we can't. I'm urging you to approve it and open it for full time. Just because it seems like too many people are burning at both ends. I need you to consider the parents, the employers, but most of all, our children with the education.
Thank you. Emily Peterson.
Hi, Emily Peterson, 1230 South Westchester Street in West Milwaukee. I'm just addressing the committee tonight because I too want to request that we continue to adhere to the metrics and follow our plan that we have set in place earlier, since our plan is science-based supported. And as previous people have mentioned, the metrics are good. This is good news. I'm very happy that we're all taking this seriously and we're doing our part to keep our community safe. I do want to address a few factors as we are deciding on a date, because I am also a teacher in the district. And I know that not everyone has fully been vaccinated because the vaccination date for educators opened March 1st. And if we are removing one safety precaution, which is social distancing, which has been communicated that it can't be guaranteed, I get it. Classes are full. There's only so many places you can go in your classroom. It's logical to put another safety measure into place. This decreases chances of staff needing to be quarantined and for educators to not be absent. And we all know that there's not a lot of subs out there for us. I know in my case, as well as several staff members from my school, we were able to get vaccinated right away. And if we started on the 22nd, we would be ready because we were vaccinated on the 21st. But unfortunately, in the nature of the vaccine, it's possible that we all could have symptoms. We could be absent during that first week back. And I'm just curious on how the district is going to address those likely possibilities, because that too hurts not only our kids, but our school community. In our school in particular, we have staff on FMLA and we have staff quarantine. We are stretched thin as it is. And our focus in our building and our school is to keep our kids educated and embraced and have them find that joy in learning. And in order to do that, we need to have our environment successfully set up. So when you do decide tonight, board, whatever your decision is, as I said the last time, I will go with it. I will be excited, enthused, and march on. But I want to make sure every single factor is considered so that, again, we can have a successful learning environment as well as a safe environment for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Schultz.
Yes, hi, this is Alex Schultz, 726 South 119th Street. Well, I guess the first thing I'd like to say is that we have some health issues in our family that would make us a high risk if exposed to COVID-19. Because of those circumstances, we're concerned with how our daughter is, or how our children are going to be completing the school year, whether it be virtual or in person. We're concerned because the circumstances our daughter may be assigned to teachers potentially outside of her school with only 2 months remaining in the school year. She could be pulled from her teachers, her friends, and her routine. If she gets new virtual teachers, we can pretty much assume that they are going to be given a group of children who they know very little about, and also be given very little time to plan lessons for that group. On top of all of this, we're giving one opportunity here to speak for 3 minutes or less, to voice our opinions and ask the questions, only 2 days before we have to make a final decision without all the answers. What we would like to know is what kind of platforms the virtual teachers will be using to teach the kids that are going to be virtual. And will the students that have to go virtual stay with other kids from their own school? Will there be mixed grade levels in one class? And the most important one, how is the school district going to ensure the progress in the curriculum isn't lost moving from one teacher to another?
Thank you. Janine Bagley.
Janine Bagley, 2826 South 83rd Street. I'm begging the board to vote for a March 5-day-a-week start date. I'm on the ground begging you guys to please make this happen. The metrics have been met. This really shouldn't be an issue right now. We've been virtual for way too long. This is hurting my children's education, their emotional and mental well-being. My kids ask every week on Monday if they can go back, if they're going back to real school this week. Real school meaning 5 days in the classroom. They tell me that their best days aren't the weekends with me and my husband. Their best favorite days are Monday and Tuesday when they are at school learning. That right there is telling you something, that my children would rather be in school, in person, in school, than obviously virtual, and rather doing the school than being home and playing with me. I mean, the kids, they've been out of school way too long. This is ridiculous that we're still discussing this now. We're one of the only districts that are still having this discussion. We need them to be back. We need a March date. We do not need an April date. Again, this is ridiculous. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn Gillen, I apologize. I skipped over you last time.
That's okay. My name is Lynn Gillen. I'm at 2137 South 88th Street. And I just wanted to urge the board to vote to get the kids back in school. My kids personally are suffering academically and emotionally, and we can't seem to find a routine with the hybrid learning. It's almost worse than the virtual learning. And they keep asking, when is it going to go back to normal? And my job has decided that we can no longer support the virtual side of the learning. So they've decided that I have to now choose between my kids' education and my job. And because of that choice, it's hurting my kids. So I just want to urge you to vote to send them back. Whatever the metrics state is the date that you need to do, then that's great. Just having some kind of light at the end of the tunnel is needed very much right now.
Thank you. Carrie Wargalet.
Yes. I just want to say that
Your name and address, please, if you could, for the record.
It's 3234 South Villa Circle.
Thank you.
The reason, I have been on all Facebook platforms complaining about how we have been virtual for way too long. I have a 6th grade student that is now outside of the district. And one of the deciding factors of that was because I wanted my child to be in person since day one, which she has been. The school that she is in and the district that she is in is right next to ours. So it still boggles my mind why West Dallas, West Milwaukee has waited so long to go from virtual to hybrid to at least 4 days a week. I have a senior at Hale that is top of her class. She's an AP student. She's part of the National Honor Society, French Honor Society. She's involved, she's a mentor, and everything else that goes along with being who she is. And she has struggled this year. And it's a shame. I mean, she just wants to be in person. She wants to learn. She just wants to be there. And enough is enough. And we need to get our kids in school, and we need to do it starting Monday, not March 22nd, not some date in April where you're only giving them a month and a half in school in person. So again, enough is enough, and we need to move forward, and we need to do it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Alicia Tovar Fregoso.
Honestly, my honest opinion is...
Alicia, could you list your address, please, for the record?
Oh, my Alicia Tovar Fregoso, 1245 South 50th Street, West Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I think we should be able to go. I think students should go back in person every day. It doesn't matter if it's before spring break, as it would just be better if we all went, because it's honestly, it's not fun. It's not fun to be in your house all day when you're on virtual. and it's just not fun. I feel like everyone should be able to go back. It would be better, but one risk is, since there's going to be more people, there could be a risk of getting COVID-19 or getting ill. But it would honestly be better, or it would still be a bit better if if everyone was able to return back. Thank you.
Thank you. In the gallery, we still have public comments in the gallery?
Good. Okay. Hi, my name is Amy Groff. My address is 12940 West Crawford Drive. I am here tonight on behalf of the West Allis West Milwaukee Education Association. First of all, I would like everyone to know that the Teachers Association has always supported a return of students to in-person learning, but under safe conditions. On February 17th, the association surveyed staff to find out any concerns regarding the implementation of phases 2 and 3 and the plans to return to in-person learning for phases 4 and 5. The results from the survey about phases 2 and 3 are relatively positive, but the results from the survey for phases 4 and 5 were less than positive. I would like to highlight some of the positives. The purchase of active pure air purifiers for classrooms and other spaces that do not have a MERV 13 rated filter, a plan to move breakfast and lunch out of the classrooms, listening to elementary teacher concerns about not returning to school the week prior to spring break to allow time for vaccinations, continuing to monitor both internal and external metrics with the assurance that if there is a surge in the COVID-19 burden rate, the plan will be paused. The biggest concern on the survey is that elementary teachers will be returning 5 days a week. Many teachers feel that this is inequitable since more than half of classroom teachers and all specialists at the elementary level continue to teach both in person and virtual at the same time. A solution that was offered is that building leadership work to reconfigure classrooms so less elementary teachers will have to do this. Currently, all building leadership teams are working with staff to implement a plan that will satisfactorily address this concern. Here are some other concerns. Schools will be unable to enforce social distancing guidelines set by the CDC. The inconsistent cleaning protocols, which are currently being addressed by Steve Eichmann and his team. Communication regarding COVID-19 safety protocols has not always been clear for staff and families. This makes it a challenge to follow the safety procedures for all involved. Finally, many staff have had the opportunity to receive their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination. Since the lack of access to the vaccine was a prevalent concern in the survey, this may no longer be as much of a concern. However, a top priority is to ensure that all teachers have had an opportunity to receive the full vaccination prior to the return of all students face-to-face. We are looking forward to seeing the results of the survey that was sent to staff regarding their access to the vaccine. We also want to make sure that the district is prepared to accommodate all staff who may need time off following their second vaccination. Dr. Lexman and the school board have done a commendable job thinking of the safety and well-being of all staff and students. We understand the hardships that families have faced and appreciate everyone's support and patience during this pandemic. We believe that everyone wants what is best for our students and staff, which is a safe return to in-person learning at the earliest on April 8th. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Amy Keeney.
My name is Amy Kunai. My address is 1544 South 96th Street, West Allis, Wisconsin. I am actually just coming to speak in regards to, I have two different broads of the spectrum here. I'm an emergency room nurse. I've been working in this COVID environment for the last year. I have two children in the district, one that loves the virtual aspect of it, and it's great, and we want to keep her virtual because she's thriving in it, and one that isn't thriving so much. So he can't wait to be in real schools, what he calls it. But I do want to commend that I respect any decision that is made, just because obviously working in the healthcare field, I know that this disease is not fully understood and everything changes by the minute. So I do understand that completely. I want to thank like all the teachers, because since doing virtual school this year, it was completely different than how it went out last year for my son. I've been in constant communication with his teachers, along with my daughter. I want to say they've been very responsive. If I have any questions or I want updates on how they're doing, I get them very promptly. I do think that I would like to see my son go back to school, just because I see him happier. And I think as a parent, we all want to see that, especially in the emergency room nursing world. We are seeing the mental health aspect of what this does to people by staying in the house too long. So I don't want to see more kids feel like that's their only option, is to end their life. And I think that we have to consider that as something that we're either talking about in school or letting them know they always have somebody there. Fortunately, I haven't had to deal with that with my 2 kids in the district. So that's a great thing, but I do understand that there are kids that are struggling. So I think that has to be a part of the decision today. I understand the vaccine component, and I respect that to have the 2 vaccines would make the teachers feel safer being back in school. Like I said, whatever's decided is decided. I just want what's best for our children. I do have 2 questions in regards to like, if we're going to hear an update on the virtual school, for the parents that are interested in that. And like, if there's going to be any options to like how we can catch our child up from just not having the consistency of the last year and it just being an odd year. Obviously, we're all seeing that with COVID. Wanting to know if there's like a plan moving forward to like, if you want extra help with your child. That's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, I have one more comment. This will be last call for entering your name into the comment section, to the chat for registering for the comments. This will be the last call for that. I have one more registrant, Mr. Kinsey.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not a resident of West Allis, but I do teach at Nathan Hale. I live in New Berlin. I just want to take the opportunity to thank everyone. I spoke back in January, and I got to be honest, I was concerned. I was nervous about how the return to school would look. And I think from administration, the school board, everyone, I commend them for the steps that were taken, the honesty, the willingness to make the transition as safe and as comfortable as possible. So my sincere appreciation. And I totally understand both sides. I have to be honest, I'm not requesting anything. I get it. I want to offer, I guess, a little bit of maybe positivity to parents. I teach AP European History and AP World History at Nathan Hale High School. And I just want people to know that across the world, across the nation, this is the trend that all schools are facing. The College Board, the people who assess AP, have moved their test windows back a month for schools who choose, because this is kind of just a common experience. I mean, the data that I received from the College Board indicated that only 23% of AP World students across the globe were on pace to like meet the traditional curriculum. So we're not alone. We are certainly not alone. I also want to thank the district for offering the opportunity to get a vaccine through the district. I thought that was fantastic, and it showed great intentions from the district. And so I thank you. My second vaccine is the 20s week of March, and I'm very excited about that. So sincere thanks for that. Parents, all I can say is regardless what we go with, hang in there, do your best. We're trying our best. And I think we're so close. Regardless, we're going to make this work. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. That is it for the public comments on this evening. We can go on to item 7, Superintendent's report.
Thank you and good evening, everybody. And thanks to all the parents and employees that spoke during public comment. I think it lays out the dilemma of trying to figure out how to move forward, maybe better than my presentations this evening actually will. We're going to start with the update, which is not the action item in terms of a decision point that we're looking for direction from the board through. That particular item will come a bit later, so this will be a little more focused on where we are right now. And then we're going to focus a little bit on, what comes next, kind of even beyond the decision that we're asking the board to consider this evening. There's some new information we want to share about what we're thinking in terms of really kind of starting to move towards the end of the year. So I'm going to share my screen and get us going here. Okay. So like we do with each of these, a little bit of a quick agenda. So again, just flash on our guiding principles that we've held to all the way along, where we are in the metrics, and everybody's right. The metrics we've set, we have met. Although there's some interesting kind of conflict between the metrics we set and the current CDC guidance, and even what many school districts are doing that are different than the CDC latest guidance. And then, like I said, the focus of this is planning for end of year events like prom and senior picnics and all the celebrations. And there's some good news in that, in the planning and our engagement with our health department at this point. Dieter will talk a bit about summer school planning, and then we'll start taking a look at kind of where we're going in the action item. Again, these are the guiding principles, and trying to find a balance between what students, families, and employees need and adhere to all of this is, why there's a conundrum that needs to be constantly worked at to try to find the best solution. So our latest metrics continue to improve. It's really good news where we are. And so again, like some of our speakers said this evening, be consistent with the mitigation practices. It seems to really be helping us now. And even when our Milwaukee County goes below 100, that'll turn yellow. And that's the threshold we need to hit to actually go to phase 5. So right now, we should be in phase 4. However, what really caused me to pause was the feedback from our employees. And it was the survey that one of the speakers referenced this evening. And the feedback about the level of concern about our phase 4 and 5 plan. And that's why I thought, well, when I have that kind of conflicting information, we've met the metrics, but our employees are very concerned. I think it's my responsibility then to bring the conversation back to the board. And that's precisely why we haven't moved forward and why we need to have the discussion and get some direction this evening. The internal metrics continue to improve. So this was the March 8th metric, and that's also really encouraging. And we hope that that stays exactly where it is, especially as we move to phases 4 and 5. And then this is the CDC guidance. And so this is what I was talking about, where there's a little bit of conflict in the thresholds in health metrics that need to be met. And this is how they've laid it out. And this is a 7-day average in terms of they're still using the burden rate or case rate and then the percent positive rate. And where we are, at least the last time I looked at this was Friday. Now, substantial transmission, we're still in orange, but this has been coming down quite steadily. And so that's also really good news. And the 7-day percent positive, this is even lower than what I reported on the previous slide, which was the 14-day average. So again, all moving in the right direction. But this one is where the little conflict comes in. If the indicators don't agree, what the CDC says, you implement the action that corresponds to the higher threshold, right? And that would be the orange. And under the CDC thresholds, this is where we should be, and this is where we are in elementary and hybrid, and middle and high school and hybrid, right? But as a number of the speakers this evening point out, lots of our neighbors are in full in-person instruction, and it seems to go well with the kind of mitigation practices we have in place. So, and this I report on each time. It's just our own kind of internal tracking, and this has stabilized. It went up for a while when we moved to hybrid, and now these numbers have come down and they've kind of stabilized. So maybe this is kind of the new norm in hybrid instruction in terms of internal active cases, the number of staff or students that need to be in quarantine, and those that were told that just need to do self-monitoring. and I anticipate we'll see a little bit of a blip again, or a little bit of an increase when we move to phases 4 and 5, and hopefully then with good practices and maybe some of the new air filtering that we're proposing this evening, it stabilizes quickly and we keep kids in school. So on the good news side of things, for end of year, it gives folks some hope that as things continue to improve, and I think we can start to more safely assume they will, with more and more vaccinations out there. But with all of these, we're working directly with our health department. They're still not, our health department is not recommending mass gatherings, but knowing that, essentially school is a mass gathering, and transmission rates are much lower in schools, but they're encouraging us to consider outdoor options. That includes prom, and we're not the only ones. Franklin and Cudahy are talking about prom under the stars, so prom on a football field. Other area districts that I've talked to are looking at, renting big tents to be able to have outdoor events and not have to worry maybe so much about weather. With whatever we do, face masks and social distancing have to be part of the plan. It's what our health department has strongly recommended. And again, they're making recommendations. They're not defining it, but they're giving us pretty clear sense that dancing is not recommended, right? Just because social distancing and adolescents dancing probably just doesn't go together. The issues of food, we do food service, now anyways in the cafeteria. So do we use a similar kind of protocol so that maybe there's an event that would be a nicer event and include, if it's not dancing, then does it include some form of entertainment? I know Greenfield is considering a sit-down event, prom goers at assigned tables. So for contact tracing, they're in cohorts. The tables are all 6 feet apart, and they're going to engage some kind of entertainment, whether that's magicians or hypnotists or something like that. And students are there involved in making those choices. And we've asked our school leaders to engage our student government as well to help plan these events. But the short answer is some form of prom will happen. And we think that's encouraging. Senior picnics, same kind of message that plans are in the works, and we will have senior picnics, again, with the health department recommendations on outdoors, and whether or not we need to spend some money on big tents to make all of this happen on schedule. It's worth an investment to give our students some sense of completing a year with the kind of celebrations and commemorations that end school years, especially for seniors. And again, school leaders and students. And we think it's really important that our seniors are part of developing these plans, because it's really for the seniors in particular that have had, now parts of and almost all of a second year disrupted by COVID, that they have a voice in kind of how this plays out. 5th grade celebrations, these now, they vary from school to school already. It depends on the traditions of the school and what kinds of things have been implemented over time. We're talking about with our health department that because these attract so many parents and the spaces we would have, I think it's unreasonable to start to plan these outdoors, just because there's so many of them, and to have rain dates and all of those kinds of things. So what we're discussing is that they would be limited to students only, students and staff, obviously. They'd be live streamed, so parents could participate, grandparents wouldn't have to travel. If we can do it outdoors, we'll try for that. And again, masks and social distancing. Now, 8th grade completion and high school graduation is a little bit different. Our plan here is that these will be held at the West Allis Athletic Complex. So we'll be using the field. A number of families encouraged us to try this last year. And where we were with the metrics and where we were at the health department guidance, we opted for the drive-up graduation. That will still be an option this year. However, there will be an in-person graduation and in-person 8th grade completions. All of it at the athletic complex. We'll be contracting with a big events company, and they've come in with the whole package. So all of the seating, they do all of the social distancing, the chairs, the special feet or covers on the feet so they don't damage the turf field. We'll be asking students that they don't wear high heels. And we're still debating on the number of tickets, and it's going to depend on how tight of a plan we can develop around maintaining social distancing as people come in, find their places in the grandstand. So tickets will be limited, obviously, to the athletic complex seats over 3,000. We're not going to put 3,000 people in there. We want to have families stay together in little cohorts and in assigned kind of seating, so we maintain 6 feet apart for families safety. And so the numbers we're still working through. And then just like I said, so that the company we go with will not only bring in chairs, but staging and screens and sound systems and whatever it is that we want or need to make this a really cool event. The plan then are kind of staged out this way. So 8th grade completions would be on during the week before high school graduation, and we're targeting June 9th for their day, and they would each have a couple of hours, right? So each school would have a couple of hours, and we've already discussed busing students back and forth. And so we'll arrange whatever busing we need. Dotke then will go June 10th with a rain date of June 11th. And Central and Hale are scheduled, so they're going to go as scheduled on June 12th with a rain date of June 13th. If we get an entire weekend that's rained out, we're talking about then do we move it to the following Saturday? It would be a much smaller event indoors at the field house at Central, right? And we want to try to stay outdoors given the recommendations of our health department. It can be larger events with more participants and attendance to celebrate our graduates. So that's our plan A. And plan B may have to then shift to a much smaller event indoors at Central. But we're hoping and praying and crossing fingers that this entire plan works. So then a little bit on summer school. So Deidre, I'll let you take this one.
Good evening, everyone. And we are looking at our plans for summer school and really talking about doing our summer school differently than we have in years past. We know that we have students who need the opportunities to re-engage with school. We know we have students who need the opportunities to address some learning gaps, to address some credit deficiencies and all of those pieces. And so we are proposing right now to have 5th through 12th grade summer school housed out of Dotke Project-Based Learning High School. We're going to hire our teachers and give them additional time to plan so that they can actually do some personalized learning plans with the learners who choose to come to summer school or need to come to summer school. We'll be providing transportation this summer since we'll be centralizing it to one location. We're investigating options for free childcare for our staff because they will be committing extra weeks of instruction to the process. Normally our summer school is 4 weeks long, 4 days a week. This would be 6 weeks long for the 4 days a week. And then we are also starting on whether or not we want to do a more collaborative 4K through 4th grade summer school as well and start doing that out of a central location. It still wouldn't be by summer. We'll still be able to meet the metrics and the way that we've been doing things from a health and safety perspective, but it really gives our students an opportunity to dive deeper into some of the project-based learning work, to really start getting evidence of standards, to do that in some smaller cohorts all summer so that we can personalize the learning experience to really get them re-engaged in the process. As we know, it's been quite the year on staff and families and our learners. And so we want to do some bridge activities this summer to really get us ready to be re-engaged in the learning process fully in the fall.
Okay, thank you. And then next steps, and we'll answer any questions about this part of the presentation. Again, the action, that's another presentation. So we're going to continue the end of year event planning and really get some input now from our students to finalize those plans. And Deidre, just like she said, we're even looking at 4K to 4th grade summer school, and that's just beginning. We're monitoring state guidance, and there's been some comments from our governor about potentially changing the school start date. And I think we would be interested in taking advantage of that. So if we can start accelerating learning and get our kids back in the fall sooner, we think that makes sense. And then our recommendation, like I said, to move to phases 4 and 5, that's a little later in the agenda this evening. So with that, I will stop sharing. And Stephanie, if you want to take a look if there's any questions at this point.
Any questions on the update from board members? does not appear to be so. We can move on, Dr. Lexman.
Sorry. We'll go on to the next item. So 7.2 is the legislative update. So our Board of Canvassers certified election results. So on February 19th, 2021 at 5 p.m., the Board of Canvassers certified that the following 6 candidates are eligible for the April 6, 2021 spring ballot for the school board of the school district of West Allis, West Milwaukee et al. It's Brendan Burns, Jane Carr, Amy Deal, Christine Klug, Joseph Mikolicek, and Gary Schultz. So congratulations to all that are in the running, and thank you for being willing to commit to serve on the school board if you're elected. And then the GOP asks our governor to prioritize in-person instruction with the Gear 2 funding. So on March 2nd, 2021, GOP lawmakers asked Governor Tony Evers to prioritize schools that have offered in-person instruction with the $20.8 million in federal funding that the governor has sole discretion to distribute. It's the latest attempt by Republicans to place an emphasis on funding schools that have offered in-person instruction over those that haven't, citing the additional costs they've incurred for cleaning, safety measures, and transportation, among other things. Our district, we've stated publicly that safely reopening schools should be a priority for all, and it's unfair to punish schools with the greatest safety concerns. So this issue will likely be part of the upcoming budget discussion on school aids, and we'll be watching it closely. And then school district COVID-19 immunity included in an unemployment bill. So in February, Governor Evers signed a new bill into law that deals primarily with updating Wisconsin's outdated unemployment compensation system. It also contained COVID-19 related provisions, which create immunity for entities, including school districts, for many COVID-19 related claims from students, employees, and the general public. And this has been an ongoing question that comes up from time to time, especially from employees. Is there any liability if there's an exposure that happens in my classroom or in our school? And so this would provide the immunity. Now, it's what our attorneys have advised, that it's very difficult to be able to determine exactly where an exposure has come from. But this will help kind of answer that set of questions that have been lingering since all of this started. And I'll go on to 7.3, which is the recognitions. So National School Breakfast Week, March 8th to 12th. So we want to recognize and thank Sodexo and all the folks that run our breakfast program for the significant contributions of school nutrition and the importance of a nutritious, well-balanced school breakfast, which contributes to the health, well-being, and the education of children. At Central High School, they'd like to thank Nate Rice and Carrie Henson for their work on the Central Town Hall and Black History Month activities with the elementary schools. And Principal Taylor shared the links, and I popped into a couple of the presentations where the high school students were doing Black History Month presentations for elementary students, and they found some really age-appropriate content. It was engaging, and the younger kids had some great questions. And when the teacher noticed, so one of the little ones saw me in the room and said, "Teacher, there's a man in here." And so I thought, well, that's a good sign that they're paying attention. I get the kind of safety part of that. But the teacher very much appreciated that I, got the word and popped in and was able to send a nice message for the kids back to the principal at Central. They also want to thank Assistant Principals James Young and Brian Summerfield for the continued work with the book studies on race and equity non-negotiables. They also want to thank their custodians, Harrison Giesfeld, for his continuous improvement in making sure our building is safe and clean, and to thank the Dean of Students, Shondale Hernandez, for his efforts to make home visits and his work with non-attenders. At James E. Dotke Project-Based School, retired Dotke teacher Peter Kraker has volunteered to help us transform our old boys locker room space into an aquaponics lab. He has spent endless hours identifying community partners and securing donations to make this powerful, deeper learning opportunity a reality for our students. At Shared Journeys, we're grateful to West Allis Central, the Interact Club, and the community for the baby item drive they facilitated for Shared Journeys. We received so many needed items. Jenny Salasinski, Danny Hebben, and Lisa Cola received certification in teen mental health first aid. At Pershing Elementary School, we'd like to recognize our health room monitor, LaDon Quick. In addition to her role as a health room monitor, LaDon has helped with attendance, lunch duty, recess duty, plus many other projects around the school. We're thankful for her on all her hard work. And then at Recreation and Community Services, we'd like to recognize Program Manager Bobby Foreman for his exemplary leadership with Distance Learning Camp and the opening of AM Action and Action 330 programs. Bobby has coached, mentored, modeled, and supported staff as we've navigated how to safely reopen our programs to best support students and families. His collaboration and responsive approach also helps mitigate and diffuse any challenges. And then finally, just one update from me, because the rest will really come in the action item related to the returning to school plan, is that our facility planning process goes forward. We've tried to make the process a little more front and center recently on our website. So right next to the reopening kind of planned our website around right now, it's distance of virtual learning, and if the board supports it this evening to move to in-person and virtual learning. And right next to that is the facility planning. So it's a big button that takes you to all of the meeting minutes and notes and background documents. And we're just trying to draw more and more attention of the public to that process because it has some long range implications for how we're organized and what schools we want to focus on to improve. It's exciting work. It's not easy work for that team. It's a team of over 50 people that are employees and many, many community representatives. But it's important work. And I just want to keep drawing the public's attention to it because I don't want there to be surprises when at the end we start talking about, making sure we have the right number of schools in the right places and that we're going to be going to the community to ask for some support to help improve our schools and make them support the kind of learning that we are really focused on today and the future. And so with that, I'll conclude the superintendent's report.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Lexman. All right, we'll move on to the board reports. Then we'll take a look at the board calendar. So today, Monday, March 8th, we have a regular Board of Education meeting. Immediately following, we do have a workshop from Financial Stability and Efficiency on pupil count, 2021-2022 enrollment projections, estimated revenue limit calculations, and preliminary budget projections. On Monday, March 15th, starting at 6 p.m., we do have a workshop, Financial Stability and Efficiency, on our facilities update. On Monday, March 22nd, beginning at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting. And immediately following that, we do have a closed session. On Monday, April 12th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting. And immediately following a workshop with College and Career Readiness on Achievement Gap Reduction, our AGR update. And then we have some board committee updates for this evening. So first, our Communication and Community Relations Committee, Mr. Sikich. You're muted, Jeff.
Now?
Perfect.
Very good. All right, Communication and Community Relations Committee. We've got a couple of topics, I believe 3 that here I'm going to report on. Number 1 is our logo and branding. And the key part of that is that we're still working with our consultant on our logo and branding project. And our next action will be when the logo project is complete, we will make a presentation to the board at a complete board meeting. Topic 2, the Neola project. The main details, key details, is that we clarified a couple of questions on our policies with our consultant, Richard Zimmern. The first one is we had a question about how someone verifies veteran status for veterans as classroom volunteers. We clarified that veterans are defined as armed forces personnel with discharge papers which document that person's military service. Second one, we discussed policy 9103 regarding complaints when the board should be notified of a complaint. The board can be told the bare facts that a complaint has been lodged and at a particular level. Any facts, including the complainant's identity, should not be revealed because the board must be kept clean in the event of an appeal. If a complaint is successfully resolved prior to reaching the board, then the board may be told about it since it's no longer an active complaint. These details will be in administrative guidelines when they are completed. And our next action on policy, we are ready to move forward with our rest of the Neola policies. Number 3, our district customer service survey. In partnership with Studer Education, we are conducting a district consumer service survey from March 3rd through March 10th of this year, 2021. This is a short survey sent to school leaders, district office personnel, and school secretaries. It asks 5 questions about accessibility, accuracy, attitude, operations, and timeliness. It's designed to help managers and directors measure responsiveness and satisfaction in how we work together as an organization. And the next action on that is when the survey is complete, directors and managers will review the data. That completes my report, Madam President.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, did you have anything else to add with regard to that? Good, excellent. Move on to our next board committee report, employee engagement and culture. Mr. Keller.
All right, good evening, everyone. So we talked about 2 major things during our last meeting, and the first was the compensation committee, as we're working to create a salary structure that's a little bit more competitive. They are meeting again tomorrow. The committee to this point has discussed Waukesha, Whitnall, and Kettle Moraine as models. We've been able to pull some pieces from each of those models as we're looking to move forward. The committee is also making progress on possible dispersal of the $2 million for the professional educator employee group. Deidre and Caitlin will also be meeting with the committee in upcoming weeks to discuss micro-credentials and answer other financial questions. We've also continued to review our Neola policies. Where we were discussing the 3,000 level Neola policies at our last meeting. In particular, we spent some time focusing and working with our district legal counsel regarding the policy 3214 regarding staff gifts, because we know that can be an area where there's some gray area, especially in terms of parents who and students who might like to present their teachers with gifts at the end of the year. So that's been revised to indicate a dollar value that falls under that nominal category. And with that, we're going to continue to stay up to date on these 2 topics and continue to review the Neola policies as we move forward.
Anything else? Mr. Thompson, anything else to add?
Nope.
Excellent. Great. Thank you very much to our board committees for reporting today. This has really been a great addition to our board meeting and keeping a lot of things front and center and definitely open in dialogue. But this has been great. So hopefully these will continue, and I think add a lot of value to the overall meeting and to the board engagement. So thank you for continuing to do that. All right, move on to our consent agenda for the evening. There are 3 items. Item 9.1, the approval of minutes, and item 9.2, our employment summary, and item 9.3, our supplementary contract. Does anyone need anything separated this evening? We'd look for a motion.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any additional comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, consent agenda passes. Thank you very much. All right, move on to our action items for this evening. Item 10.1, the proposals to revise the reopening schools plan. Dr. Lexman.
Thank you. I'm going to share screen again and jump to the other presentation. So this is now the presentation around a revised proposal. And some of this, I will be repeating what a number of the individuals that shared public comments this evening have said. We'll be making some of the same points. And like I said a little bit earlier, the points that come from different kind of interest sets and different kind of needs create the dilemma for us to try to figure out what's the right next step for our school district. Again, I'll touch on the guiding principles. I've already talked about this. The metrics have been met. Then I'm going to talk through what are the primary areas that really cause us to kind of step back right now in terms of concerns moving to phases 4 and 5 immediately. We'll talk a little bit about kind of just a note on before and after school care and what that will look like, just so the board understands kind of what the plan is should we move to phases 4 and 5, and then I'll touch on our recommendation. The guiding principles, again, right, we've touched on all of this and we've seen these for months now, but considering safety and well-being, and I'll talk a little bit about where we are with the air purifiers. on the learning that works for all and trying to sort out the elementary schedules. And we heard some commentary about that. And there is no perfect solution inside of this. You know, when we built the original elementary schedules, we knew we'd have virtual kids, but we didn't anticipate we'd have them all year long. Trying to continue to be responsive and flexible to what our employees and families and students need, and then what's practical to get done. So again, I've already shared this slide, right? We have met the metrics to move to phase 4. And so it really begs the question of why haven't you? Because on its face, we should have, although as we've said all along, and this metric continues to go in the right direction. But as we've said all along, as we get new information, we have to take some time to learn and adapt. And I believe it's important to consider this information, share it with the board, and ask the board for some direction. And even though at the end, everybody knows that our recommendation is that we would implement phases 4 and 5 April 8th after spring break. We're prepared to go earlier, but it needs to be earlier in consideration of some of these concerns. So the employee concerns, the elementary schedules, the fact that social distancing is limited and therefore opportunities to get vaccinations become more important, and then the lead time for the air purifiers that I already mentioned. So this is the one that really caused me to kind of step back and say, ooh, I have to go back to the board. And just so that we're all kind of talking through and using each other's brain power to help kind of solve the competing needs in all of this, right? And one of the public speakers this evening referenced this survey. And you can see we had some pretty good support in where we are with our phases 2 and 3, right? So about 70, almost 3/4 rated 3, 4, and 5. And then when they asked the question about how confident are you with the plan around phases 4 and 5, it ended up being not very confident. And that really, I think, is time to just take a pause, that we want to move forward with more confidence, and we think we're getting there because, more and more of our employees have managed to at least get the first vaccination since this survey was conducted, and that may shift things a bit and may shift our thinking this evening as well. The elementary schedules, and this is probably the hardest thing for us to resolve, and I'm going to turn this slide over to Deidre just to talk us through where we are and what some of the options we've considered, and then have kind of taken off the table, and what are the other things that we're still considering to try to figure out how to make this work. So Deidre, it's all yours.
Thank you. So the elementary method of instruction is a challenge because when we look at our elementary schools and how our learners are and our families are making those decisions, when we get that updated information, we make whatever plans we can to adapt and adjust. And a couple of our schools did a bit of a refresh and shuffled some things around at when we move from phases 1 into phases 2 and 3, so that then they are able to then more easily adapt to phases 4 and 5. And some of our schools didn't yet make those adjustments. The challenge at elementary is a couple of big things. One, that it would depend on the spread of the students in the school, how likely it is the teacher could continue teaching both virtual students and the in-person students. So if you have 42 students at an elementary school who have chosen to remain virtual, you could have 3 in one 4-year-old kindergarten class, 4 in another 4-year-old kindergarten class, 3 in 3rd grade, none in 4th grade, and then 15 in 5th grade, or different configurations that happen in the course of that. So being able to adjust, if I have half of the 5th grade that's staying virtual, that we would then realign to have there be one 5th grade teacher who's with the face-to-face students, one 5th grade teacher who's with the virtual students, would make some sense. But that does mean that certain families would get a new teacher in that model. So we've spent a lot of time asking other districts in our area what they've done. Lots of districts went to a virtual only option for the year, and the only thing you can do is come out of that virtual option. So then they've had the same virtual teachers all year. Several districts in our area have purchased software and basically used a platform with Wisconsin certified teachers to teach the students. There's a few examples out there like Edmentum, And they've just said it is too hard for our teachers to be doing both at the same time. So therefore, we're going to purchase this software, and there's going to be licensed teachers that aren't employees of our district exploring those options with students. That is one for sure that we considered and rejected. That is way too far off of where we want to be with our sense of community and our sense of belonging in every classroom, so that we can ensure that our students still feel included as part of the process. So right now, where we are, our principals are working with teachers to reduce these options of teaching both face-to-face and virtual students at the same time. It's been a concern of both the larger community and our school board since the beginning of the year. And as we all know, we have a very large objective to start to retain as many teachers as we can. And some of that is by adjusting the way that we're doing the compensation model, as the committee mentioned earlier, as Brian mentioned in committee. And some of that is by listening to our employees and trying to support them as best we can as they're doing this work in our schools. So we are really trying to have our principals listen to our teachers a lot around what's working about this and what's not. And then there are some pockets of this that don't make a ton of sense. Having a 5th grader go to a new teacher for that last quarter of school, that doesn't totally make a lot of sense right now when they've been in that learning community all the way through, especially if some of the students were needing to be with a teacher from a different school. So the elementary schedules are still a work in progress. We had about an hour-long meeting today, and then I sent out a Google form to gather more information from the elementary schools. And I watched the method of instruction spreadsheet, like it's a ticker tape parade going on each day as I'm trying to figure out exactly how many learners we have in which situation to try to make this work as best we can. It would be very difficult to maintain this and have students be able to be in a virtual only option without the teacher doing both face-to-face instruction and the virtual students, without there being some movement of students and teachers. So we are trying to minimize that. We are trying to meet the needs of the things the teachers have expressed to us as a significant concern. As you heard in open comment earlier, the idea that elementary being 5 days a week and trying to do both is a burden on our teachers that has been will be a stretch for them and very challenging for them as we're all working through what all this transition means. But at the same time, we'll have students who need to quarantine during this time. And so therefore, do they go to the virtual teacher? Does that teacher have to do both during that time? So this is a work in progress. It will be hugely helpful for all of you listening in our larger community that you do make your method of instruction choice with your school as soon as possible. The deadline for that is Wednesday. We've actually moved that deadline up because it is all dependent on what those numbers tell us. What's the best way to do this in the next phase going forward? And so it has had some adjustments because the numbers that we get each quarter change depending on what the options are. And every time it shifts, we could have an abundance of 4-year-old kindergarten students in virtual or an abundance of 5th grade students in virtual, where you can't put those students all in the same classroom, even if it's a virtual classroom, and expect there to be a quality of instruction that we've prided ourselves on in West Allis, West Milwaukee. So that is where we are right now. We'll have another meeting tomorrow to look at our method of instruction again and consider some of these other factors that things like are we going to do if a student needs to quarantine, things like what would happen if we tried to adjust schedules within a school so that there was space and time for teachers to be able to effectively do both. Are there additional tools that we would need to consider? Are there teachers who are taking on enough of an overload that we have to consider some sort of compensation? So those are all the pieces that we're factoring into how to make this work as best as possible for our elementary students and our teachers and our families.
Great. Thanks, Deidre. Another piece, and we've heard about this in public comment again, but I just want to be really clear, especially with our parents, that moving into phases 4 and 5, social distancing is going to be very limited. We'll continue one-way hallways, and our high school students have, from what I've learned, have done a really good job respecting all of the new kind of procedures that have had to be put in place to help keep everybody safe. And we're going to continue those things. We'll still have the plexiglass dividers. We'll use where appropriate. We mentioned that schools are making plans to move meals out of classrooms if that really makes teachers uncomfortable. but not all schools are doing that. And some of this, we also want to honor our tradition of some local decision making. We think it's important that our teachers have a voice in the decisions that impact their jobs. And that is a precise question that we ask every year on the employee engagement survey. And so some schools what they've discovered through this is they actually like breakfast and lunch in the classrooms, in terms of, especially in elementary schools, where it really builds that sense of community, where you have 2 meals together as a little family. And so the meal plans will vary a little bit from school to school, like the elementary schedules may vary a bit from school to school. And all of that kind of falls into, with meals, with hallways, with classrooms, limited social distancing, vaccine access. And this is kind of interesting. So here are the results of the survey that somebody asked for in the public comments today. This was quick, so we didn't leave it open very long, but we got a really good response of 746. So we sent out the email with the survey link. I followed it up with a quick recorded voice message that went to all of the telephone numbers we have for employees. And so we can see that we're just over half of us have received our first shot, and I'm amongst that group. But we're at, just over 5% that are fully vaccinated. So those are the people that actually have some immunity. And from what I understand, it takes a couple weeks after the second shot where you really start to have some developed immunity. We've got another almost 20% that are scheduled for their first shot. So that's really good. And even that number may have gone down. I think it's a reasonable guess that number went down over the weekend as more people access shots during the weekend. 13% not scheduled but working on it, and that number may have shifted. 10% do not intend to get the vaccine, and so if there are any employees that are listening that indicated that option, we respect that, but still encourage you to think about getting the vaccine. That is a pretty stable number from district to district. That's what my superintendent colleagues are reporting. They're at about 10, 11, 12% that don't plan to get the vaccine. So our employees are no different in terms of that particular choice. But overall, that is good news. The concern inside of it is coming back before people have had the second shot and the opportunity to develop some better immunity. And it was already mentioned, right? So that we'll have, because this is half of us, that means we got our shots last week, most likely. And that second shot will land the week of March 22nd for many of us. And I'm one of them. My second shot is on March 24th, right? And so if I get the side effects, I think that's a Wednesday on the 24th. Yeah, it is. So, that Thursday or Friday could potentially be a sick day for me. If I use a sick day, my work waits. If a teacher uses a sick day, that work can't wait, right? Because the kids show up. And so we will have more demand for subs, likely more demand to have to cover classes. And if we hit our thresholds where we just don't have enough coverage or teachers showing up because they're experiencing side effects, we may have to close classrooms or even schools in order to manage through it. We've done a really good job so far, and I want to thank teachers here again for the attendance rates that teachers have right now. It's really encouraging. But again, it's just another point of information that we're asking the board to consider this evening as you give us some direction. This is the same, just in a graphic, so you see it a little bit differently. But the red is the first. I've had my first shot, and then the lead time for air purifiers. So Steve Eichmann, I think I saw you in there, and I'll let you talk about a little bit of the details. But a little later in the meeting, we're asking the board to waive a purchasing policy because this is a significant dollar amount order, so in the 400,000 range. But Steve has done a very nice job getting quotes and negotiating and trying to get us the best price possible, but also try to get us access to these air purifiers in an expedited manner. So he's working directly with the manufacturer and with board action this evening to allow us to waive that particular policy, which would have required bids. Rather than just quotes, then we can move forward more quickly. But best case, it looks like probably 2-week turnaround. So Steve, I don't know if you want to add any detail here, just go right ahead.
No, I think you summed it up pretty well. I mean, they're saying 2 to 3 weeks from the time that they get the order, that's when we would receive it. And then we just need a day or two to actually get them deployed out to the sites.
Perfect. Thank you. And yeah, so again, they'll go in all spaces that aren't covered by MERV 13 filters in the air handling system, as well as other common spaces, even if they are covered by MERV 13. So front offices that are busy, cafeterias, if we're moving more meals, and there may be 2 or 3 of these devices in a cafeteria. We did order, I think the number was 74, 75 more than we really needed to provide the additional coverage throughout the building. And our intent is, even though it's a bit of an ongoing expense because there is some maintenance of these devices on an annual basis, but we think it's worth it, that we'll actually continue to use them throughout their lifespan, because it just makes our environments healthier, even beyond COVID. And then a note on before and after school care. The plan is to continue to offer before and after school care at the elementary level, now 5 days a week in phases 4 and 5, but staffing will need to be increased. We're not planning to offer after school programs at the intermediate level until the fall. There's been very little interest. And that allows us, allows Shelley to have a little more flexibility with the available staff to support elementary schools, because there too, they'll have increased numbers and social distancing will be a little harder. So having a little more staff to help with the before and after school care for elementary will be a good thing. And then the recreation day camp that's been running at the rec center, that'll be discontinued with phase 4 coming online. And that's because there just aren't enough students to keep it running. And what I understand is, I think all but one is planning to go to phase 4. And so that's a little bit of a note on before and after school care. So given all of that, right, so the challenges around vaccinations, the elementary schedule, getting the air purifiers in and deployed, it essentially is a dilemma of timing, right? So we have the available kind of lead time to get these things in place before we start bringing students back into the buildings for phases 4 and 5. And that's why our recommendation is Thursday, April 8th. And that also gives us the advantage of a PD day on that Tuesday of that week, because that's a voting day and we don't have students in schools on voting days in our current calendar. Wednesday would be then a check and connect day, kind of a virtual launch day would be the plans. And it would also allow teachers to meet students that have, when it's a new teacher for that student, and they'd be able to then kind of move from class to class to class and talk about all the expectations in phases 4 and 5 for all the kids that are coming physically into the building. So it gives us kind of a virtual kind of practice to implement phases 4 and 5. And we did that coming into phase 2 and 3, and that I think was helpful. However, like I said earlier, it is possible for us to move forward with, I think it's reasonable. It's not as ideal, but reasonable, of March 22nd, that Monday before spring break. And there, the advantage is, we'll be in phases 4 and 5 for 1 week. If we get any kind of outbreaks, we've got spring break to try to get that resolved and rework plans. So if we need time to kind of address any things that aren't working the way we would prefer, it gives us that week of spring break to work on some of those things. So that is a bit of an advantage to March 22nd, and it gets us started, right? At some point, we have to go. But it's a balancing act. It has been all along, knowing that there's not going to be a perfect solution. We will hear from employees that aren't happy about the final plan for phase 4. We'll hear from parents that aren't happy about the final plan for phase 4. There is no perfect solution in any of this. But I think we've also heard public comment this evening. There's some appreciation for the approach we have taken. We have been thoughtful, and we have tried to resolve the competing interests in a way that best addresses everyone's needs in a way that's safe, But again, it's not perfect, right? And we'll continue to learn, and hopefully we can pivot away from COVID soon and actually start planning a regular school year to kick off hopefully earlier than it normally would. So that's the last slide. I'll stop sharing, and then Stephanie, if you could start to take a look if there are any questions from board members.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure there's going to be questions from board members. I do want to do a couple of comments. So thank you for the presentation and putting all this out there today. It's definitely wonderful to see the progress that our metrics and how far we've come in making and continuously adjusting our accommodations to keep our students and staff safe in our buildings. But before I open up the discussion to board members, I just kind of want to set the parameters for our conversation and for the deliberation for the board members this evening. We met in early January to approve phases 2 and 3 and set a timeline for review, and to implement phases 4 and 5, we had added the March 8th review. We had approved and continuously discussed and reviewed the health metrics that the district was consistently following as our guidelines throughout the pandemic. We've utilized this information regularly, and it's been the main determining factor in the board's decisions to move into the subsequent phases. So because of the current metrics and the continuous progress our community has made in containing the virus, I don't believe that there's any hesitation from the board on whether or not to implement phases 4 and 5, but rather when. So just to make sure that we have that kind of established, I think that will change the dynamic of the conversation. We've been continuously utilizing the set forth external and internal metrics regarding burden rate and case rate guide decision-making throughout the district. And based on the metrics we agreed upon and have been consistently following, the district could move to phases 4 and 5 in 2 weeks, as Dr. Lexman just mentioned. 2 weeks has been the best practices timeline for making phase changes that the board administration have been considering throughout this year. The district's been continuously planning for phase 4 to 5 return, and many of the key components are in place, although we know that there is still work to be done, like elementary schedules and vaccine opportunities and the potential for building shutdowns because of side effects to the vaccine. So Dr. Lexman did present some additional and new factors for consideration tonight, including new information on the vaccines and the schedules, building and classroom preparations and adjustments, and staff concerns outside of our control considerations. So thank you for Dr. Lexman for considering these factors and presenting them to the board for inclusion in deliberation tonight. And thank you to our staff for providing this feedback for us to consider. All the information will certainly be taken into heart before we continue to vote. At this time, I'll open up the discussion to board questions and feedback, and ultimately the board will and should consider the ongoing phase 4 and 5 implementation plan, timeline and metrics, and considering the additional information presented by Dr. Lexman and the recommendation of the district administration. At the end of the discussion, we'll entertain a motion to implement phases 4 and 5 with a defined start date, either March 22nd or April 8th. So I wanted to set the parameters for what we'll be discussing and how we'll be discussing that. And then I will, for board members, for comments and questions. Harry?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so first one regarding meals. I believe Dr. Lexman said meal plans will vary by school. Will that impact food distribution, the food handout on Wednesdays?
Caitlin, I think that one's for you.
So that's a good question, Gary. So it could potentially look different, but the same amount of students would still be served. It would just be the room in which they're served. But schools work closely with Steve Kosner, our food service manager, and actually he meets with each principal kind of in each step before we move into our next phase to make sure that the plan is solidified before we move forward. So he's been doing that prior to these conversations about phases 4 and 5, and we'll do sort of another round once after tonight's decision is made to prepare for the implementation of phases 4 and 5.
All right, thank you. Mm-hmm. And I know it's been mentioned that the move into the phases is unfair to elementary teachers, but the original return to school plan that was passed in July was unfair to elementary teachers. So I don't really expect an answer to this, but why wasn't this brought up by the Education Association at that time? There's been plenty of time to say, hey, the original plan was unfair to elementary teachers, but nothing's been brought up. And then my last comment, using Dr. Lexman's scenario of getting a shot, let's say on Wednesday, March 24th, and having a sick day on Thursday or Friday. If we're in hybrid and a teacher is impacted by the vaccine, then it's possible that the B students, the Thursday, Friday students may be impacted. So you could have a scenario where Monday, Tuesday students will get educated by a teacher, teacher, if they get the vaccine, they could be out Thursday and or Friday. So one could make an argument, wouldn't it be better to just have all the students in person to get some education that week? And if the teacher gets a vaccine, they miss some days, versus some hybrid students getting in-person education and some in-person students potentially missing out of instruction. And I'm done.
Okay, no, it's an interesting way to think about it, Gary. So thanks for introducing that. And I do want to just back up. So the association has expressed that concern over the months. To me, I think this is maybe the first time they've expressed it directly to the board. I don't believe that the way we've built it is unfair, right? So that's just a disagreement we have. Because the intent all along was that we would have many fewer elementary teachers teaching both in person and virtual, when secondary they all do, because there's no way to clean that up in a high school with all of the course offerings and the way the schedules run. And so that's why we created the Wednesday kind of as a way to provide secondary teachers with a little bit of time to be responsive to the virtual students and to the additional planning. And I know lots of our elementary teachers agree with this kind of analysis, but the secondary teachers, high school teachers in particular, can see 150 different kids in the course of a single day. Right, where core elementary teachers will teach their class of 24, or if they have 5 virtual kids, they'll have 20 kids in front of them. So it is a different workload in the way I at least analyze it, and I know we don't all agree on that. But I think one of the things I think elementary teachers I do respect that they're disagreeing with is that we're going to 5 days a week. And why not 4, where they could still have some flexibility on Wednesday? Well, the answer to that is that it really is to be responsive to what parents really need, right? So to ask parents with young children to find 1 day of childcare per week is really problematic from a parent perspective, right? So, and we have a number of parents, and board members receive these emails just like I do, that are, and we've even heard it tonight, begging for their kids to be able to get back to 5 days a week, because we have parents that need to go back to work 5 days a week, right? And so again, it's one of these dilemmas that we're trying to find a way to balance. And depending on how the elementary schedule piece works out, there may be other solutions we start to introduce. And, I'm going to start having some conversations with Ann Garensor. She's turned into a just phenomenal thought partner through all of this. So I'm going to reach out to her tomorrow and just say, okay, let's kind of talk through, are there other ways that we maybe can provide some support for elementary teachers to make this work? And being a little bit vague there because I don't want to get ahead of that conversation with Ann. But that's at least a long answer to that, but hopefully maybe it explains a little more of the internal kind of dynamic and dilemma that lives inside of the elementary scheduling piece.
Board members? Brian?
I got a couple things, and the first, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I think part of the thought process between Wednesdays, from the elementary perspective, they have one set group of students, but they're planning for 4, 5 different subjects, which it has been the feedback that I've heard from that perspective. I think, there's a little bit more concern there. However, that ties in kind of to another concern I have. We've said multiple times that we don't really know what that education piece is going to look like. The elementary piece is going to look like, because there's so many moving parts. Yet we're asking families to make a decision by Wednesday. And I get that. I get that we need to kind of know numbers and know what we're planning, but we're asking people to make decisions when they don't have the information. Information that could be crucial to what's important for them, their family, and their individual learner. And to some degree, that goes at the other levels as well. For instance, I know intermediate schools are having their conferences Wednesday. I know me personally, I'm going to rely on those conferences to make my final decision for my child. And I have those conferences till 6 o'clock at night. I don't know that that's adequate time to be able to make a decision in terms of what my student will do. So my concern with that is, what are we going to do, or what options are there for families who feel like they have to make a decision and rush a decision, and then have their students go to school, and in day one through, or maybe even into the second week, they're getting constant feedback that this is not an environment that they feel is safe for their child. What are the options at that point?
Yeah, so Brian, nice job articulating one of the other dilemmas, right? So it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg kind of dilemma that, right, we have to start moving in some direction to figure out any direction. And so we've got to have the information and have a date certain. But the answer to, what happens if, those are going to be, I think, rare cases, and what our response is going to be what we've been doing all along. Under unique circumstances, principals are working with families to make adjustments. And so if a family selects in person and finds that it's just not the right solution, or the other way, on given circumstances, we use the MTSS process to figure out what's in the best interest of the students. So we use a consistent process to treat each of these kind of unique requests the same. So we're treating them all fairly. And that has been working for us to make adjustments. And we do have some, it's small, but some elementary students that are at school 4 days a week, because through the MTSS process, it was determined that absolutely had to happen for that kid, and we were still able to maintain social distancing, right? So we'll continue with those kind of approaches under unique circumstances, but we do need the information, the method of instruction choices to take a next step. And if we want to try to hit a March 22nd, we really need the information.
So some follow-up questions. Obviously, if we have our full student load coming back, social distancing, and we've talked about this, it's not going to be possible at the level that we're doing now. So I'm assuming desks will still be spaced out as much as they can, obviously much shorter. I would imagine we're not going to have people sitting right next to each other. I guess and maybe this can't get an actual answer, but how much distance are we expecting between students? I think you indicated the plexiglass will still be used. I heard of some feedback, though, that those are, in some cases at least, trifolds, where a lot of times they can be knocked over. And if you have a more congested area, I would imagine that's going to happen a lot more often. So I guess, are there any thoughts regarding those situations?
So we're going to do the best we can with social distancing. I think Matt Lesser at Hale has talked about, can we get to 3 feet? And that seems to be a little bit of what is in practice in some places. So to try to have some distancing, but the recommended 6 feet is not realistic. I just have to be blatantly honest about it. So there's no, false hope or expectation around it. The trifold plexiglass solution ended up being not a solution, right? So that a lesson we learned, that plexiglass, especially with little kids, needs to be anchored. But what is interesting is we've implemented phase 2 and 3. We went through a wave of, and we heard lots of feedback about, we don't have the plexiglass, we won't be safe. Well, as we've gotten experience in phases 2 and 3, that fear and the expectation that we need more has gone away. And so it doesn't seem to be a practical and necessary solution. I think the better solution has been masks and hygiene and social distancing, which in the end, I think maybe makes sense. So the, plexiglass that's affixed we'll still use. And even my saying that, if there are needs for additional plexiglass that needs to be affixed in other places, we can still do that. But it's, again, recognizing that some of that was not the solution we needed, and learn and keep evolving.
And Marty, if I can just add to that, we're finding that the staff is more comfortable, just if they want to wear both the mask and the face shield. And so those have been purchased and are out in buildings for the staff members that feel like it. In those first few days, we had people wearing as many, pieces as they could in order to have that sense of safety. And after their first few days, people started to take pieces of parts of that off because they just weren't as comfortable wearing all of those items. But we do have some teachers who still teach in both. And that's been the solution, is just to have the face shield over the mask so that there's an additional layer of covering, especially if there's somebody that comes in close contact with learners more frequently. And that was also how we prioritized the list for access to the vaccine was we put the teachers who work more directly with our learners or our educational assistants who physically interact with learners on a more regular basis further up the list for those who chose to get it, just so that we could try to combat that in any way that we possibly have control over or can do.
Brian, did you have another follow-up?
Couple more, and just some clarifications, and I'll ask them both and then wait for an answer. At the intermediate level, I guess more so than any others, are the cohorts kind of staying together and not moving classes as often? Is that's kind of the plan? I believe I understood that was. I just wanted to clarify that. And then at the elementary level, I know it was discussed that there actually are some teachers that have indicated that they want to keep those students that will still be virtual. So is that the plan for those that have indicated that? And I guess what additional support, if they need it, will they have? I guess my biggest concern is, and it's been talked about by multiple people, some of our guests, speakers, and Marty, is having as few transitions as possible from a teacher perspective, especially for those fifth graders and those that just want to finish up with their friends as best they can after they've been impacted so much. So, what's the plan from that perspective?
So Deidre, I think you're closest to all of that.
Yep. So at the intermediate levels, yes, they are trying to limit transitions as much as possible. Not quite the modified block that we've gone to at the high schools in their schedule, but naturally in intermediate school, we already do a block for English language arts and math. So for chunks of the day, the students aren't traveling anyway. And so we've made some adjustments to that depending on the building and how it's set up and the ways to travel from one spot to the other. So they still have, there's a consistent way that each building has designed to contact trace by keeping those transitions as limited as possible within the course of the instruction that we're trying to provide. And then lots of that helps with some of the learning communities that our intermediates have had for the last few years, because they stay in those spaces for a very much longer part of the day anyway, and therefore they aren't going back and forth between classes. So that one is already addressed. The elementary, Jeff Borland in our office frequently says the statement, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And that is what it feels like we're trying to do with the elementary schedules. So we have teachers who are expressing a frustration that they have been teaching both virtual students and the face-to-face students and not feeling like that's doable for them in the course of their roles. We have families saying that they don't want us to move students around, but there's really, we can do anything, but it's really hard to do both of those things. And so we are trying the very best we can to find any reasonable solution within that we can. And we have had some teachers say, I really want to keep my virtual learners. I've gotten in a groove, or I teach in a pod, and therefore we can kind of make it work between myself and my teaching partner. And so we want to be able to honor those wherever we can, but then we have to be able to provide the additional supports that are needed when that's not possible. The challenge becomes that sometimes it's not possible for 2 or 3 third graders at a school, but it is possible for most of the rest of the school. And so then it's not fiscally responsible to hire an additional person or do something like that for 2 third graders at a school or for 5 fourth graders at a school. So that's where the challenge comes in. And we hear the issue, and families have expressed that when we've called. The secretaries at our elementary schools and our elementary teams have been furiously calling the families to check in and say, where are you at? And some families have said, I'm not going to give you my decision until I know exactly which teacher I'll be assigned to or what the plan is. And so we're doing our best to work with the information that we have at hand, and then providing those supports for some of the teachers. One of the supports that they really asked for was having a second monitor in the classroom. So although normally under our tech plan, that is never something we would support, we amended that for this year to say, yep, we will support that, because if that's what really is the deal breaker between the two, certainly we can make the adjustments on our end that we need to our policies and our practices to make things work. So that's been a portion of it. Lots of it is in ordering supplies and materials. In a couple of the schools, it's been a revamp of the entire school schedule so that we could free up some time for specialists to still teach both, but not try to do it at the same time. So we've done a lot in an effort to make all of that work. And that's where it really is important to get so much teacher input and make sure that the schools each have the capacity to make the decision that's right for that school and that learning capacity, that learning community, within kind of a continuum and a framework that we can also financially support and that we can ensure that teachers have what they need. So that's kind of a roundabout answer to, but that is the challenge that we have, is that we're being asked to do everything, and we can do anything, but we really can't do everything. And so it's just creating a tougher spot for us to be in, but there's also then an opportunity for multiple meetings in the next week with our elementary team who, every time we get back at the table, has new ideas on how to solve some of these problems. So we will be at it most of the days this week until we find a solution that we think is the most reasonable for everybody.
Thank you. Real quick, and then I'll go to you, Noah. What would be the plan for, either way, we'll be moving to phases 4 and 5 in the coming weeks. What type of accommodation will the staff have to get their classrooms ready so that they can make adjustments and whatnot? Because again, we don't want everyone coming in on the weekends. I mean, I know that it happens anyways, but to be given the time to be able to adjust and get prepared.
So it's what I described in terms of aiming at April 8th, right? There's some time built into the calendar. March 22nd, that time is not built into the calendar. So we're going to have to figure out it kind of in the regular working. We have asked elementary principals provided 2 additional hours of planning time per week for elementary teachers. And so there is a little bit of time built in, but I think they're using that because, manage the dynamics of in-person and virtual. So it's not ideal in terms of implementing more planning. I mean, could we add another planning day? We could. We'd have to come back with a calendar revision to the board. I'm reluctant to do that. We've changed the calendar a lot, and that actually it seems to be contrary to what we're trying to do, which is to get kids back in school, and then we take a day of school away. And so it's going to be hard is the answer. There's not going to be additional time. And so we'll do the best we can to be ready, whatever the date the board sets for us, knowing that either direction comes with advantages and disadvantages. And that's the reality.
And just to add to that, we did have an elementary planning day last week. And so as the teachers have known that this phases 4 and 5 are coming, it's what we've planned for all year long. We did have quite a few use some of their elementary planning time last week to start to say, oh, time out, I'm short this, or I'm missing this, or I'm, needing this or needing that. And so last Wednesday, we did have, most of the time on Wednesdays, we have staff not physically working from the building so that they can do those deep cleans. But on those elementary planning days, we've said it was okay to go ahead and come into the building because there are just some things you need to get ready and prepare and do those kinds of things. And our facilities team has been absolutely unbelievable at every single school site at quickly trying to go in and help teachers move things around or do what they needed to do to make sure that it was all set up. So we're not starting from scratch, but yes, the additional day to really know now that we are going to be moving more furniture in or moving furniture around, that just makes it a little bit more challenging to get ready for that March 22nd date.
No, I cut you off before.
I wasn't talking, so that's fine. Good evening, everyone. So I have some questions and then some comments. I hope that will be okay, just regarding the metrics a little bit, my perspective on this and kind of from where we started to where we are, and how I think that reflects to the plan moving forward. But first and foremost, I'll start with what Stephanie brought up. She stole one of my questions, which was in regards to providing some support to staff for being able to get ready for in-person school, and asking if facilities and custodial staff might be available to, if it was just a matter of moving furniture around or moving more desks in, if that would be available to staff if it's needed, if they can request that. I know that was a concern that was brought to, I'm sure more than one of us, our attention regarding being able to, as part of preparation, there's the instruction side of it and there's the physical side of it. And so I just hope that we'll have those things available to staff if they need it at each individual building. And if we need to schedule extra hours for some facility and custodial staff after hours, even if we have a shorter time frame to be able to facilitate some of those moves, I hope that we'd be amenable to doing that.
Yeah, I don't see why we wouldn't. So yeah, it makes all the sense. And I see Caitlin nodding along. So
great.
Caitlin's making notes.
Yep, absolutely. I'm writing it down, and Steve's with me too, and I see him nodding as well. So, yep, absolutely.
Okay. So one big concern that came from staff obviously was the teaching virtually and in person at the same time. And there's some staff who want to keep their kids and they want to do it. And you've already stated that if they are saying they want to do that, they will be allowed to do that. I just want to reiterate that that is correct, regardless of what the individual school plan might be regarding virtual and in-person students. As say one school is saying that we're only going to have virtual teachers and then in-person teachers, but what if there's one teacher in that building says, I really want to keep my kids, I'll teach both, I'm fine with that. Is that being allowed?
So that parts of that conversation came out of a meeting that we had earlier today, Noah. And originally we had said, as a school community, you have to decide one way or the other. Because we don't want that to feel like the families are saying, well, how come you weren't willing to do both? Like within a school, that makes that very challenging on the teacher to say that you are or you aren't. What came to light as I looked at method of instruction numbers again over the weekend and first thing this morning was that there are pockets where it just won't make a lot of sense for there not to be one or two staff members in a school, or when it comes to the fifth graders, for there to be some options to do both. So today we talked about where there would be that flexibility to not do something as a whole school and kind of navigate it through. What we don't want parents to think is it's not because there's a teacher that doesn't want to do everything and anything for their children. Our teachers have done such incredible work all year. And we hear that even from the parents that are frustrated at board meetings and everywhere else. So mostly it is kind of a numbers issue, or it's the teacher being earlier in their career. And this has been a hard balance. We have quite a few teachers that will be out on some FMLA at the elementaries. So some of them are already taking a split class and covering an FMLA. So it is not, in any case, if that does not work out and we have to make some adjustments because the teachers are not so well intended, there are some other circumstances to some of the school plans that make them more complicated. But yes, we decided today as an elementary team that we needed to apply some new flexibility to the thinking than how we were looking at it last week. And so that's where we landed after today's meeting, and they're filling out forms for me as we speak, trying to figure out where we have holes and where we as a team need to figure out how to support each other to navigate best next steps forward, to try to meet everybody's needs as best we can, knowing it's not going to be perfect because we can't do everything. So that is where it sits right now.
Okay. I just wanted to ensure kind of the understanding of what the intent was. And whenever possible to try and provide for staff if a request was made to be able to do that, if they can do that, to allow them to do that. Kind of off of that is the question regarding student quarantine. So obviously the pie in the sky hope is that no one has to get exposed, no one has to get sick, and no one has to quarantine. However, reality is going to be very different than that, as I presume we'll have that as we do right now. And so in those situations, we're now in person, and there might be someone who has only in-person people that has to quarantine. And I understand this might be different based on school, based on what their school plan is, but in general, are we expecting that the in-person student who has to quarantine, but it's not so ill that they cannot attend school virtually, are they going to attend that with the teacher that they had in person? Are they going to be shifted to a virtual instructor that would be for their grade level, possibly at their school, possibly not? I would presume that we wouldn't want to yank them out for 3 days or 2 weeks, wherever it is for a quarantine. They would want to stay with them. And then how are we supporting staff in that instance where from day to day, they have 0, virtual kids. Now they have 1, now they have 2, now they have 7, now they have 4. how is that going to look for a staff perspective?
Yep. So those are great questions. And it was something that came up earlier today with the teams as well, because quarantines are short term. Right. And occasionally we get an unusual situation where it's a rolling quarantine. The student gets exposed here and then they get exposed here. And the next thing you know, they're learning from home for 5 or 6 weeks at a time. But for the most part, quarantines are short. And now that there's more rampant availability of testing, quarantines have tended to get even shorter. And so those pieces are really helpful for that. So if it's a temporary situation where a teacher had one student who needed to quarantine for a few days, of course, we would make some adjustments and work around that. Likely, it would be a balance of synchronous and asynchronous time, as it has been during hybrid, to be able to say, okay, we want you in the class and doing these things with the class. And then when we're doing our small group activities in the class, since you're the only one logging into this class, you'd be doing some things in an asynchronous way. So that would be highly likely, where that's going to land as far as the plan for that. If it started to get to be half the class, we'd be having a different conversation over what the plan would need to be once we knew from the nurses what the quarantine period is. So if more than half a class is quarantined for 2 weeks at a time, obviously we would have to say time out. Does anything we're doing right now make any sense? This is the individual circumstance that we have. And then we just work with the teacher to make a plan that made the most sense for kids and the teacher and everyone involved. And we anticipate, we'll see, we had, a couple of small pockets where it got bigger right out of the gate. And thankfully our teachers had used really good mitigation procedures, because it would have shut down a whole school if we hadn't have been. But it was, more widespread than we were hoping for. And so we just had to navigate through those one-offs as best we can, step by step.
Okay. So what I'm hearing, just to summarize, is that in general, we would expect them to stay with the current teacher that they would have. And if it became larger than that, then it would be a different situation. Obviously, if the whole class is in quarantine, then I guess everyone's virtual. And presuming this teacher is well enough to continue teaching, that would just work from that perspective.
Yes.
Okay.
And in some cases, we will reassign additional support at the school if it was for a short period of time, right? So our health room monitors have helped with some student supervision, and in occasions when they didn't need to be doing the other duties of the health room monitor, we've added positions, as many as we could find and were reasonable to schools, to be able to help with some of that backup and that support, so that if suddenly there was, a teacher that needed the time to spend with some students who are learning virtually, that we could help navigate the best social distancing possible in the classroom at that time. So those are also additional supports that would be really individually situation dependent.
Okay. Just one comment about the plexiglass that we discussed earlier. Even though we found that in some instances it became maybe less needed or less requested, we may find that as we lose the social distancing, it becomes actually more important, because then we do have that physical barrier between students. In my son's class, they have the plexiglass right on the desks, and there could be something sitting right next to them. And as long as they're within that plexiglass, it does provide that physical barrier, along with the mask, of course. So I just think that maybe, even though some staff and maybe there was less request for it at that time, when we lose that social distancing, those anxieties may come back. And so I hope that we'll be, flexible in that. And if I don't know if we have stock still, hopefully we do. That if we can, like, oh man, now that I got 24 kids in here, I really do need to have one where I didn't think I needed one before, or where I had one before and I got rid of it. So if we can make sure to be aware of that, to make sure that we're aware of those possible requests when they come up, because I could see that as myself being like, oh geez, there's a lot more people in here now.
We keep a running FAQ going with all of our leadership team, and Steve put a note in it this morning that if that is a need, that he put in there, just email him and the team will work on whatever it is that we need to take as next step. So I think, as normal,
some principals have already emailed me and said, in anticipation of us moving to phase 4 and 5, I would like this many of this size if you have it. So I've been working with the principals individually like that.
Oh, great. Excellent. That's great to hear. that preparation, I think, hopefully will be helpful for staff to know that we're at the ready to go with that if needed. A comment on the vaccinations. So number one, fantastic between the health department and Freighter to be able to get staff a vaccine is great in the short period of time. It looks like over half the staff, at least that answered the survey, will be able to be, get the second shot in that March 22nd week, which is great. There is such a varied response to that second shot that between immune system responses, if you've had COVID before or not, there's just a lot of different possibilities. People who have absolutely no reaction to are, very, very ill. And I hope that this is not really a question, it's more of a statement that that parents will understand that in that week, when that happens, that there may be situations where that we have to shut down classrooms and school buildings. I know Dr. Lexman already said this, I want to reiterate it. Some people get very, very bad side effects from this that does not allow them to be able to be up and functional human beings. And that is 100% expected. And it shows that your immune system is doing what it's supposed to be doing. But I just hope that parents will be patient with us in that. And that is a process that will allow then people to move forward and be safe and not have to be as concerned about exposure to COVID after those symptoms are done. I myself luckily didn't have any symptoms. So those of you who are getting your second shot, don't think that you have to get symptoms. I didn't get any. So it really just depends from person to person. So my last comments I want to be in regards to the metrics. Obviously, I've been a big proponent of following the metrics, following guidance from public health professionals from the very beginning. I think it's very important to ensure that we're doing what the people who have gone to school and worked in these fields for years and years and years say is the best thing to do. And although other districts didn't choose to do that, we did. And I don't regret us that we did that. I'm very happy that we did. Moving forward now, looking at the metrics, we have now moved into what we had set up a few months back, what we thought would be able to move forward in phases. And that's listed on the website as having a burden rate under 100 and having our percent positive rate under 5%, and a trend of that, which we have now seen in the last 2 weeks. A lot of people are saying, why aren't we just going right now? Well, part of the reason is there is planning involved, which we're talking about. Classrooms have to be reconfigured. Lesson plans have to be reconfigured. We have to talk to parents to understand what they want to do with their children so we know how many people to expect when we do move to phases 4 and 5. So I hope that parents can understand that's why it's not an immediate change. The other thing I wanted to note, another concern about the staff was brought up regarding the CDC guidelines. So the new guidelines that were released a couple weeks ago did lay out very nicely and thankfully, finally, what sorts of things people should be looking at in the community when making decisions regarding going back to school. And I have confidence that if those things existed back last October, that other districts may have made different decisions as to what they would have done when it comes to moving forward with in-person learning. Now, one thing that was different from what we had done previously, as far as looking at metrics and what the CDC did, was a 7-day average versus a 14-day average. And so for, when we were doing this, a 14-day average was what everyone was doing. You always looked at the 2-week average to determine what were you looking at for those numbers and make decisions based off that, because it's all about trend. But now that we know more, the CDC says, well, 7 days is good enough, and that's what we're going to do. So the Milwaukee County rate, the burden rate, is in fact higher than the CDC recommended for in-person at 64 right now. One thing that we had decided also a couple months ago was to look more at our local community data and have that have a higher weight than what the county data as a whole would be. And if we look at that, I actually reached out to the West Dallas Health Department to see if we could get a 7-day rate for just our community. And they reached out to the EPI group that they work with, and they are actually in the process of determining if they're going to move forward with the 7-day rate, as what they report to us moving forward, but that hadn't been decided. And so they didn't have a 7-day rate that they could give me, but they did tell me that a rough estimate would be just to divide the 14-day average by 2. Now, obviously, it's not exact, because depending on what numbers are in the first week versus the second week can determine if you're going to have a low estimate or a high estimate. But if we go with that, that was coming from the EPI report group themselves, and then also through Bob Lightshow from the West Allis Health Department, he said that would, be a reasonable way to look at it. And if we do that, we take our rate that we had, we get about 28.17 as our burden rate currently in the community. And so if we combine that with what we already know, with our percent positive rate being well within the range that we had set forth, we are actually meeting the current CDC guidelines that we are looking forward for. And I wanted to explain that so that staff who have concern about following the science, which I'm obviously very important to me to do, I really think that we are. And having the next 2 weeks for a March 22nd date that we would move forward with, which is what I am in favor for, to continue looking at those numbers, making sure that the trends are continuing, allowing more staff to get vaccinated. I think that we'd be well positioned to move forward with that date. And that is what I wanted to say about that. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak a little bit out of here.
Thanks, Noah, and for the explanations there too. Obviously, we do have a unique perspective there, and so we have come to rely upon your explanations to the board as well. So thank you for continuing to do that, especially as we're faced with, a more important decision tonight than we've had to do in some other times. So thank you for taking the time to go through that in layman's terms as well, which is always appreciated. Other board members have additional comments or questions on the proposals? So as the way the proposal was presented by administration, the proposal was to begin phases 4 and 5 on April 8th. And the board can also consider to move on the March 22nd date, which we've discussed in some detail. Dr. Lexman has commented on adjustments that can be made to accommodate that date as well. And Noah has gone through some of the details that would allow for that based on the current metrics as well. So we would need to be consistent in what we would want to do with regards to moving forward before we would go into a motion. Noah, you had your hand up?
I'm sorry, there was one more thing that's off of Brian's question regarding the parent survey. Is there any way that it can be extended by a day to allow people a little bit more time to make a decision, or is that going to severely hinder the district's plans, especially if we look at moving to a March 22nd move for phases 4 and 5?
Yeah, my sense of where we are is that parents won't have more information to make a better informed decision by adding 1 day. So I think that particular frustration will remain, and the loss of that day to have some numbers locked in to really start drilling into the planning would be significant. I think where it lands right now, actually, I wish it were shorter, to be quite honest, about what we need to do. So I think where it sits is probably the right compromise.
And as you mentioned before, if there was, if a parent made a decision and they got into that decision and realized that they wanted something else, that they can work with their principal at the school level to try and figure out something that would work for them.
That's correct. We have an established process that we've used consistently throughout this to make those really unique accommodations, and that'll continue.
All right, thank you. I apologize.
Brian?
Yeah, quick follow-up on that. Just for clarification of the parents and everybody else who might be watching this, the deadline's Wednesday. Is that Wednesday at midnight, or what exactly does that look like, so that everybody kind of knows when they need to have that decision locked in?
Oh, Beth. You're muted.
We'll say midnight on Wednesday.
Perfect.
11:59 p.m. Wednesday.
Good.
I have to do that at work too. If I don't give a specific time when something has to be responded, end of day can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. So thank you for asking for the clarifying time. That does help.
Yeah, definitely.
Beth, you were unmuted for a second. Did you want to add any commentary? Ask a question? No? Other board members have additional comments or questions? Hello?
Nope, just.
You unmuted, so I just took that as a cue that you had something else to add. So.
Nope, I'm just preparing to make a motion.
I don't know if there's any other comments or questions. So at this point, we would entertain a motion.
So I would motion to move forward with the district's plan and move forward to phases 4 and 5 on March 22nd.
Second.
Seconded. Moved and seconded to move into phases 4 and 5 on March 22nd. Any additional comments or questions? Can we do a roll call vote, Suzette, to make sure we've got everybody?
Stephanie, you have Jeff waving his hand.
Jeff?
Just a comment. I'm gonna have to be voting no on that only because I don't think that gives elementary teachers enough time to prepare. If it was the 8th, I'm all in. But
Thank you for that.
22nd, I'd be voting no.
Okay, here we go. Mr. Lee, looking for your vote, yes or no?
Yes.
Mrs. Kaiser's excused. Mr. Sickich?
No.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mrs. Justin? Can you say that again, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Eustruck?
No.
Ms. Klug?
Yes.
President Emmons?
Yes. All right, thank you, everybody. This is next phase of a journey we are all on together. Thank you to everyone for continuing to be on this path. And again, as we talked about when we went to the hybrid model back in January, this is still dependent on our community support. And so we're not out of the woods yet, and we need all of our community members to continue to be supportive. We're only successful at having kids in buildings and having staff and students safe if we all participate and we all make sure that we keep each other in top of mind and not have selfish tendencies, potentially prevent this system from working. So thank you for that. Move on to the next item on our agenda this evening, item 10.2, the Girls Hockey Co-op 2021, 2022, and 2022-2023 school years. Mr. Marion.
Yes, so this is a 2-year application. We are in the middle of the current 2-year, but the co-op is adding Oak Creek girls to it. So we need to present it as a new co-op with Oak Creek in the mix. We've been a part of it since the 2019-20 school year and would like our female hockey players still the opportunity to do so.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments about your hockey co-op? I would look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any additional comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, passes. Thank you very much, Justin. All right, move on to the next item on our agenda, item 10.3, the Technical Excellence Scholarship recipients. Mr. Carr.
Hello, everyone. I'm not going to be nearly as brief as Justin Marion. That was impressive. Well done. But very quickly, and I appreciate having the opportunity to present the HEB grant, the Higher Education Board's grant scholarship opportunity that we have presented every year. Each year we have 6 scholarships and 2 alternates that are available to our students. And not surprisingly, this year we had some unusual circumstances that we've been speaking about all evening. And so now we only have 4 candidates who will qualify for this scholarship and have gone through our process that our counselors have helped to vet the candidates. One of the things that's a qualifying factor is the students have to be technical ed, or pointed towards a technical college. They're CTE candidates, and they have to be pointed towards a start at a technical college. Well, several of our applicants this year had indicated in their application materials that they were attending 4-year schools. So that's going to be a factor that the Higher Educational Aid Board can't provide that scholarship dollars to. So having said that, I appreciate the opportunity to share the names of our students, and then the board will need to approve them before we can give them to the Higher Educational Aid Board. So the 4 students that we are going to have as scholarship winners are Derek Ferreira. He's going to go to Milwaukee Area Technical College in Welding. Cesar Gonzalez, he's going to go to Gateway Technical College in Automotive Technology. Dalik Martinez, he's going to Waukesha County Technical College in Automotive Technology. And Pengfei Zhang is intending to go to Milwaukee Area Technical College in Marketing. We also have an alternate, John Riddell. He's intending to go to Waukesha County Technical College in some aspect of automotive. So I appreciate you giving me a few moments to explain where we are in that process, and hopefully you will agree to approve these certainly qualified candidates to earn that scholarship funding. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do we have any comments or questions? Gary?
Steve, so does the program allow in a situation like ours where if one school only has one student and not three, the ability to transfer to the other school if the other school has more than three?
Gary, that's a great question. It's one we actually asked as we were vetting through the process. The scholarships are granted three and an alternate to each of the specific schools. So Hale got 3, Dotkey got 1 and didn't have an applicant, and then Central got 3 and an alternate. So you're not allowed to do that.
Ask Deidre.
So that was a good question, Gary. We were working every angle we possibly could because we felt like we were leaving opportunity on the table, but that's just how they are in that scholarship granting process. It's a good question.
Other comments or questions? How about we look for a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any additional comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Great. Thank you so much for bringing some happy news to us too. We appreciate that.
All right. Thank you.
All right. We will move on to item 10.4, the request to waive 672R, the purchasing procedures policy to purchase the air purifiers for our buildings. Caitlin.
All righty. Thank you, Stephanie.
There you are. Moved on my screen.
So just briefly, I'm going to talk through our current policy and why we are bringing this one forward, and then a little bit more background on the air purifiers. So in our current board policy on purchasing, because of the size of this expense, and in our board policy, it's considered equipment, it falls under a process where we would need to advertise our bid purchasing procedures, which means that we'd have to go to the newspaper and publish a request for bids, which then, just by the nature of that process, adds weeks to our timeline of actually receiving and having the air purifiers in our buildings. So thus the request to waive that policy. Second, I'll talk a little bit through the air purifiers that we are looking at. So, and I guess before I do that, we've already taken a number of measures to increase our indoor air quality across all of our buildings. Our facilities team started this pretty much in March, in spring, which now is a year ago. So we have now all of our air handling units exchange rates in all of our buildings at a rate of 5 to 6 times per hour. And then in addition to that, we've increased and upgraded all of our filters, and we've talked about that MERV filter a number of times tonight. So the MERV filter went from a lower number to a higher number, meaning the filter became more efficient at gathering particles from the air. So we're now at a MERV 10 to 13 in all of our spaces. In the last few weeks, we've heard more from the CDC about the importance of air quality and slowing the spread of COVID-19. And then we also had a number of requests from teachers to bring in their own air purifiers. So we went through the process of what does it look like if we purchase our own air purifiers for the spaces in buildings that don't have a MERV 13 rating. And we put the highest level of MERV we could in all of our spaces. It was just a matter of some of our air handling units, because of their age, can only function efficiently with up to MERV 10. So we have we've done some research on the various types of air purifiers, and the type that we're looking at is it's called the Air and Surface Pro. So on the link in the exec summary, there's actually a short video. I won't show it, but it's available for anybody to go on our website and into that board book on the exec summary and check out that video that explains the technology behind how it works. I'll just read 2 sentences from this product explaining it. So the active pure cell in the Air and Surface Pro discharges invisible supercharged submicroscopic particles at tremendous speed, and these particles collide with viruses, bacteria, and molds, which immediately turn them into harmless byproducts. And it explains that this active pure technology works immediately on both air and on surfaces. So we are looking for the waiver of this purchasing policy so that we can make this purchase right away instead of waiting to post it in the newspaper to go through a bid procedure. And I can take any questions.
I have a question. Yep, I have a question. I guess, and I apologize if I missed this. How long ago did we start identifying this potential need and identify these in particular air purifiers? Because as we were getting closer to, potentially implementing phases 4 and 5, and not knowing for sure exactly what date that was. I'm just curious if this could have been done sooner in terms of this motion or this, I'm sorry, can't talk today, in terms of this item, if that could have been brought about sooner so that we could have already had ordered these.
So the answer, yeah, sure, it could have been done sooner. And then looking back, I wish we had. It really came about as teachers started making requests, can they bring in their own? And that's been going on for a number of weeks. And we just started exploring, well, what are the options? Because to find what's the best solution. But then very recently, and really within the last 10 days, the CDC really started to emphasize air quality, right? So that really kind of changed our attention to, oh, let's take a look at this. If this is a new mitigation strategy in terms of air purification, then we got to figure out how to add that as we go to phases 4 and 5, where there's less social distancing. So that's where, so the timeline kind of gets a little bit backed up, because it's really where the CDC started to emphasize that as another step to take. And there's, lots of our neighboring school districts that have more modern buildings. All of their air handlers have MERV 13 or have the capacity to have them. Ours don't. And so it becomes an important strategy for us. And the timeline is what it is at this point. And we're hoping for support that we can expedite this. And I think, Steve is probably ready to make the phone call in about 3 minutes after the vote to see how fast we can turn this around.
Other questions? I would look for a motion. Oh, sorry. No, I'm sorry. I didn't see you shaking violently in that picture. Oh.
Sorry. You see me and then you're just, okay. So I asked some questions about the air purifier before, so I got some answers. 2 questions. First, I was super confused because I know when we had a presentation about air handling units previously, our MERV rating was maxed out at 10. And so did we learn more information that some of our air handlers were able to do 13? Because I remember distinctly most were at 8 when we had that conversation before we moved to phases 2 and 3.
Yes, Steve, jump in. The way I understand, we have some that can manage 13. Some max out at 10. So Steve, you can fill in more.
Yeah, we went back and we went through and we did another analysis, and because we wanted to get as many to 13 as we could. So we went back on those that were borderline before. We did retesting again, and we were able to find additional units that were able to handle that and still be efficient. Because part of the problem is if we get the filter too high of a MERV rating, then what we do is we restrict the airflow that goes through, and then we haven't really gained anything in the end. So, but we've got everything up to either MERV 10 or MERV 13. And MERV 13, from everything that I've read and heard, is that's the minimum MERV rating that you need to have to be able to get the COVID virus out of the air.
That's correct. Are we having different units that we're looking at these air purifiers for classrooms versus larger spaces?
Well, we're looking for classrooms and what we originally were looking at, those that weren't serviced by the MERV 13 air handling units. But in discussion with Dr. Lexman and Caitlin and others, we decided that especially if we're making the migration to some sites are going to have more of the food service being done in a cafeteria in a larger room, that would have some there. And then also, as Dr. Lexman alluded to earlier, that in the offices as well, because of the amount of traffic that they see on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think that's a great mitigation step because it is able to clear surfaces. And obviously, unless you're having someone constantly wipe something down, which I'm sure is happening as much as possible, but this is kind of a great in-between thing that can still be providing some mitigation and cleaning without actually wiping that surface. So that's good. Is there a need, I guess, with so how the surface cleaning works is it's putting out these particles that are basically killing the virus in question. And is there a need to reduce the amount of air changes that are happening in order to maximize the benefit of the surface cleaning? So will the air handling, the number of air changes that are happening in a space actually reduce the ability of the unit to clean the surface?
No. And actually it'll be, you know, I can't say that it'll be twice the benefit, but I mean, you have the fresh air coming in, and then you have these air purification units that are still taking out whatever particulates may be in there that are harmful. So I think you're really getting the benefit of both. You probably have seen the CDC's hierarchy of control, and they have 5 different levels where they look at the least effective and the most effective methods of dealing with the virus. And the most effective is the elimination or the physical removal of the hazard. So we really feel between the filtration and the air exchange, and then having these air purification systems that were, in addition to everything else that we're doing, like the social distancing, the mask wearing, all of that we're doing everything that we can to make sure everybody's as safe as possible.
And these aren't replacing the physical wiping and cleaning that we're looking at doing. This is just an addition.
No, it's in addition to, so it's another level of mitigation.
Okay. All right, thank you.
They also waving their hand violently that I can't see at the moment. A lot of boxes to look at. All right, any other comments or questions on the request for waiver? Now we look for a motion then.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any additional comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, go forth and air purify. Okay, so that concludes the action items for this evening. So we will then go into our workshop, financial stability and efficiency on pupil count 2021-22 enrollment projections, estimated revenue limit calculations, and preliminary budget projections.
Thank you very much. I am going to share my screen. All righty. So there are puzzle pieces on this slide for a reason. We are going to talk through 21-22 projections on enrollment, revenue limit, staffing, and budget, and they all fit together. And this year, kind of a trend that you'll hear us talk through is how COVID has impacted us this year and next year. So starting with our agenda, and I need to move you all out of the way. We'll talk through membership and enrollment trends. We'll talk through revenue limit calculation, and then 21-22 projections for enrollment, staffing. AGR is a grant that we have. We'll talk about a philosophical shift we're taking with that one, and 21-22 budget projections. Starting with definitions, which seem the same, but actually have very different meanings. So we have membership and we have enrollment. Membership refers to resident students, so students who live here, and this does include students who open enroll out of our district. And then enrollment is our students in the seats or head count. We'll use those words as they mean the same thing, synonymously. Student head count by year with 3-year membership average. So we're going to start this presentation by taking a look at our trends. So the blue bar that you're seeing is our enrollment trend from year to year. You can see how we kind of climbed up there from 11-12 to 13-14, 14-15, and then we're slowly seeing this decline down. What I want to point out is this, and then the orange line that we're seeing is our 3-year membership average. The 3-year membership average is the number that is taken into account with our revenue limit. And you'll see here in our 2021 year, so our current year, how far down that blue bar was from our 3-year membership average. And what that did this year was provide us with additional dollars from our declining enrollment exemption. So I'll talk through that as well. But that's what happened this year. And then next year, this blue bar, for the first time in many years, ticks up because of our drop in enrollment that we saw this year, as well as all school districts, many school districts across the state saw. So how does student membership, so again, that's resident membership, affect our budget? And that is by way of the revenue limit. I'm going to show a complex looking spreadsheet here in a second, and this is the actual revenue limit calculation. And we are not going to go in the details of this, but I just want to show that this is what the revenue limit calculation is. And it's a lot. So again, we won't go into all the weeds, but we're going to pull out the high level big picture of what the revenue limit actually is. So what this means is we have a formula that is boiled down on our screen as the foundational piece of the revenue limit. We take our membership average times our per pupil allocation, and that equates to our total revenue limit authority. And again, there are many additional factors that join on top of this total, this formula right here, but this is the foundation of what a revenue limit is. So if and again, this is why the pupil count is so important, because our membership average comes from our pupil count. And so that number forms the basis of the revenue limit authority. And that revenue limit authority is the total amount of money that we get as a school district from property taxes and state aid. So this piece is just one of those pieces in that revenue limit spreadsheet. I just pulled it out so we can look at the very foundational piece of the revenue limit calculation, which is the membership. So what we do is we take our 3-year average, we take our current year, and then we take our 2 previous years of September FTE. So this is our September pupil count, membership, resident members. We add in our summer school FTE, and we only count summer school FTE at 40%, not just we as in West Allis, West Milwaukee, but all Wisconsin school districts can count their summer school membership at 40%. And we add those up to get our total FTE per year. And then what the formula, the worksheet does is it takes the average of all 3, and that is our 3-year membership average. Last year, our number was 8181 for our 3-year membership average. The numbers that we're seeing on the screen are from our actual 2021 revenue limit worksheet. So our 3-year membership average in our current year is 7983. So we dropped about 100 kids, and that is a steeper drop than we had been seeing in our 3-year membership average. So again, we'll take these numbers and we're going to plug them into this formula that we started with. Our membership average, 7983, times our per pupil allocation, which is a number that is given to us. We don't adjust this number. For us in our school district, $10,472.55. And we multiply those together to get our total revenue limit authority. And again, this is just the watered down, the basic formula that starts the revenue limit calculation. And there are a couple additional key factors that always affect our revenue limit and generally give us additional dollars. And this year with our revenue, with our enrollment and membership fluctuations, they actually had this like wacky impact on our revenue. In 2021, because we decreased, that blue bar that you saw was farther below that orange line than it had been. We received additional revenue from these 2 key factors. And because we're trending upward, we're projecting to trend upward for next year, that we actually see less revenue from these factors. So how do we determine our staffing needs for next year? And this is where Erin's going to jump in and kind of talk through how we go from our enrollment through the formula to how many staff we need for next year.
Perfect. Thank you, Caitlin. And thanks for having me this evening to speak about this. So we, as Caitlin mentioned, a lot of our enrollment impacts our revenue. And so one of the large projects we have is talking about how we go through projecting our enrollment from year to year and how then the domino effect begins to getting to how many staff we need based on our projected enrollment. So that's what I'm going to speak about this evening, our projected enrollment, how we use our projected enrollment to look at our section size by school, and then how many sections we require by school, and therefore how many staff we need by school. So if you want to go to the slide, Caitlin. So as Caitlin kind of went through, this is the same chart from before. Our enrollment has been declining, but our enrollment statewide as each school district has also been an average decline as well. But the 3-year membership smooths those changes out in enrollment, so districts have time to make those adjustments. And so that way, when instances such as this year or what we saw in 14-15 to 15-16 happen, it isn't one large impact in one year, and that way districts can make those changes over the course of a year or two, to adjust their staffing model as well. So this is our historical trend in enrollment. And so this goes back all the way to June of 2018. And what's important here is that you can see these large drop-offs in enrollment, and typically those are aligned in July when we do a rollover in Skyward. So our seniors are removed. And then what happens is you start seeing that tick up every year. That's because 4K families are enrolling. We open enrollment seats. Families get letters end of May, beginning of June, and then they start to come in and enroll. But what you can see is if you look past that huge drop, you can see the slow trend start to go to trend down. And if you look at the last dive here in 7/1 of 20, that trend, as you can see, we had a large drop, about 400 to 500 students. But what's really helpful with this historical trend is that you can start to make implications about the data where we might see increases in student data, increases in enrollment in certain grades. And so a lot of districts project enrollment by simply casting forward, 9th becomes 10th, 10th becomes 11th, right? But in our district, I think it's important as we can see trends within where we see increases. A good example of that is a lot of students after they're done with 8th grade that may open and enroll to other districts or in private schools come back to West Dallas. So we see an increase in our 8th to 9th grade. Whereas if we rolled over how many 8th graders we currently had, we would be off because we get an influx of 9th graders coming back from high school. So that's a good, just a good diagram to look at. So how do we project enrollment? So the first thing, as I mentioned, we cast forward our students. So our seniors are removed, each grade is advanced to the next grade. I use the historical trend in looking at our enrollment from each year. I usually go back about 5 years to look at where have we seen increases beyond the cast forward process, where have we seen decreases, and I make what I call adjustments to that. And typically where I find them to be the most prevalent is in our transition grades. So 4K to kindergarten, we always see an increase in students. A lot of that is the state law, students having to be enrolled at 6 years old. But a lot of that is parent comfortability as well. So we see an increase there. And then 5th to 6th grade is an increase. And then the large one is in 8th to 9th. Our projected enrollment, in many times we've talked about this, but it represents 92% of the planned max for our enrollment. And that is to retain space for the 8% is to retain space throughout the school year for the fluidity of families moving into the district, moving out of the district. We want to have space for resident families should they become residents. And then the large one that Caitlin kind of mentioned in the conversation most of the night was that our enrollment decrease this year, when we projected the enrollment this year, caused us to really have to analyze what do we think is reasonable. And what we did is we anticipated that 50% of the students who withdrew this year, we anticipate about half of them to return throughout the rest of this school year, but also throughout the summer. So an adjustment is made to account for that. And so once we have the projected enrollment, just like I spoke about a few minutes ago with the dominoes effect, then we look at the projected enrollment for the district, and then we start looking at the section size to break down, to really get us to the end goal of staff. And so how do we determine section size? Well, we use the school board policy, the teacher handbook, and then the class size ranges and goals, for student teacher ratios by grade, because they're different, looking at 4K to high school, the ratio is most appropriate to be different in those grades. And then ultimately the projected enrollment and the number of sections drives our open enrollment seats, which we went through in January, which we talked about at length. So this is the class size out of the school board policy. Skip to the next one, Caitlin. And really this is how this breaks down. And so on the left, the chart here is elementary, on the right is secondary. And as you can see on the far left column in the elementary is our grade. And then our planned max, meaning that our planned max for 4K is 20. And we fill to 92% of 20, which means that in 4K, we staff at 18 students. So any section, just to kind of move forward a little bit, any section that has 18 or less students, we would then fill that with open enrollment seats for every section of 4K throughout the whole district. So that is the philosophical approach that we take. And we do that for every grade. So if we went to 5th grade, any set we plan for, we look to have max per class at 27, 92% of 27 is 25. So any class in the district that we plan to have under 25, we would then propose, which we've been through in January, propose to have open enrollment seats to fill that to 92%. And that 2 students buffer across, 100 sections creates enough of a buffer for us to be able to kind of have the ebb and flow throughout the year of families moving in. That way it's reasonable that we can still maintain appropriate class sizes district-wide while also being able to, be able to operate efficiently.
And Aaron, just to clarify, those are not caps on those classes. That is just the start that we use in the staffing process. So a school may have a 4th grade that runs under 27, but a kindergarten that runs over 22. The goal is an average of 24-1 in the elementaries, but you have to have a starting place to make the plan. And then the schools need to adjust based on how many students enroll in each grade.
And so this is the open enrollment chart. It might look familiar to many of you. This is the chart that we had went through in January when we approved the 223 seats for the 21-22 school year. But let me talk through this a bit as it does allude to our projected enrollment, the number of sections by grade, and then there's a column there of tuition waiver. So on the far left, we have grade, and that breaks down our grade for the 21-22 school year. The next column is the desired class size. So that is the plan to max that we look at. That is the 92 percentile, the number of students that we plan to have at 92% per grade. So what this chart simply does is it takes, like in 4K, for example, we have the desired classes at 18. Given the projected enrollment, we would have 23 sections. So 18 times 23 equals 414. All right, we have 400 that we're projecting for our enrollment in 4K. So therefore 414 minus 400 as we move over to the final column is 14. So that number 14 gets us to the 92 percentile in 4K. And so as you move down this chart, that simple arithmetic is how we get to the new OE. And what you might see if you look at the column where it says 2021 tuition waivers rolled into the 2021 school year, those are the number of students who during the 2021 school year were residents and had moved out of the district at some point this year, and therefore are able to remain students in their district under a tuition waiver. And historically, we've allotted seats, to be able to potentially retain those students, given they still have to apply for open enrollment. It's a lottery and everything like that. But where you see, like in 12th grade, we have 27 is the desired class size. We have 22 sections. 27 times 22 is 594. And when you subtract that, you get a negative number. Although in the column where it says new OE, you see 2. Well, the reason that it's a 2 is because we have 2 students on waivers. And so therefore we open 2 seats. And should those students choose to apply to finish their senior year, they would have the potential to be accepted. Okay, so once we have our projected enrollment and we have the number of, we take the projected enrollment and we break that down by school and by grade. And then what we do is we look at how many sections by school and by grade do we need, and then that helps guide how many open enrollment seats we have. So once we have those 3 pieces determined, then we can look at how many staff we need. And for elementary, it's a little easier because the number of sections ends up being the number of staff you need. But for high school and things like that, the number of sections, you need the number of sections and requests to drive how many staff you need. So that's what we look at in terms of how do we break that down to how many staff we need to for each building to operate appropriately. So we're going to look at part one of this is the current staff, the sections required next year, and then staff required to teach next year's sections. And then part two is a philosophical shift that Keelan had mentioned in AGR, and we'll talk about that as well. So this chart, a lot of information, and it breaks down how many sections we currently have, our projected enrollment this year, our third Friday enrollment next year, our projected enrollment for the 21-22 school year, how many sections we need to staff that at the 21-22 school year, and then the students per section based on the projected enrollment next year, and then the change in staff. So the best way I've found to go through this chart is to go through an example of a school. So I think if we did that, that would be the most efficient way to explain it. So Franklin, for example, currently has 12 staff. Franklin was staffed at their projected enrollment for the 2021 school year, which was 266 students. On third Friday of this year in September, Franklin had 249 students. It's important to note that even though Franklin's enrollment was down 17 students, we still staffed Franklin at the current staff. We did not reduce their staff due to that. So Franklin this year is staffed at 12 staff with a projected enrollment at 266. So next year, what we're looking at for Franklin's projected enrollment under the enrollment projection is 248 students. So 248 students by looking at, as Deidre mentioned, the 22 average in elementary, 24. We'd be looking at 12 required sections to get us to 20. And so if we were to reduce from 12 to 11, then that would go over the 22 threshold of 92%. So 12 sections is appropriate for Franklin for next year, which results in a 0 change in staff. It does get a bit confusing. Like Hoover is a good example of how it was confusing to me initially, is that Hoover has 19 staff currently, but the 19 was appropriate for the 410 that we projected. When Hoover's third Friday in September enrollment came in, it was at 369. And then next year we're projecting 375. So at the very far column, you look at Hoover having a subtraction of 1, and you might wonder, well, their enrollment went up from third Friday to next year. How would they go down a staff? It's because the 19 staff Hoover has was based on the projected enrollment of 410. So really Hoover's enrollment next year, we're projecting to decrease by 35 students. Therefore, it's a subtraction of 1. And so that's a good example of how it can get a bit confusing, but looking at the information and the current staff versus the projection is how each school is staffed. And so what that number ends up looking like at the when you total up all the schools change in staff, it looks like a subtraction of 14 staff would be appropriate given our enrollment. And you can see at the very bottom, our projected enrollment for 2021 was 7,827 students, and our projected roll up for next year is 7,387. So it's about just under 500 students, so 14 staff. Go to the next slide. And then I'll turn it over to Deidre to talk about the AGR and our philosophical shift in looking at this a little differently.
Yep. So we used to have that. AGR is a grant that we get through the state of Wisconsin, and it was originally called the SAGE grant, which was the Student Achievement Guarantee in Education. And in West Allis, West Milwaukee, we tied the money to a guaranteed class size of 18 to 1, so 18 students to each teacher in 4-year-old kindergarten through 3rd grade at every single one of our schools. The challenge is that the SAGE grant actually only paid for about 25 teachers in that we received, but we identified ourselves as a SAGE district, and therefore there was this impression that the monies we received for SAGE actually covered the cost of keeping all of those classrooms at 18 to 1. And it did not. We were spending more money to keep the classrooms at that size than SAGE, than the dollars were being provided to us through the grant. So We have some teachers and some parents that are under the impression that some of that change was because they moved it from SAGE to AGR. It really was understanding a little bit more exactly how much was the grant paying for, and then adjusting to actually use the dollars that were given in a fiscally responsible way without overstretching them. And SAGE actually applies to 5-year-old kindergarten through 3rd grade. It doesn't actually cover the youngest classroom. So for us, when we moved to achievement gap reduction, we made a 5-year commitment to a contract around that. So we are due for a new contract this spring. Our previous contract was one that I inherited when I moved into this role. And when I inherited the contract was tied solely to coaching. So the new rules, the old rules, SAGE was the only strategy you could use was 18-1. The new rule, AGR said, well, we know that coaching is essential in changing the dynamic for children who come, especially from backgrounds of economic disadvantage. So you can choose to use your dollars towards coaching. You can choose to use your dollars for one-on-one tutoring, or you can choose to use your dollars for class sizes of 18 in kindergarten through 3rd grade. So the contract that we inherited and the philosophical approach to it was that the money was all tied to coaching, and it was paying for our deeper learning coaches. And then we realized that we were receiving more money in the grant than what we were spending on the deeper learning coaches. And so we added some of our other coaches to the grant to be paid for out of the grant. So there are parts of our innovation coaches that are paid for out of the grant. There are parts of some of our reading specialists that are paid for out of the grant right now. The grant, and Caitlin, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. How the grant actually works is that you get $2,621.05 per student who qualifies for free and reduced lunch. So it's another area where getting accurate numbers of our families that qualify for free and reduced lunch is super important to us, because this is an actual per pupil allocation for the number of students that we have on that 3rd Friday count who qualify for free and reduced lunch. It is allocated by school, not district-wide. And so that's another kind of misperception that I think many people had about SAGE and AGR and how that grant works. It is actually allocated per school. I'm going to create this contract for the 5 years. And what we do in the contract is commit to a strategy and a measurement tool. So what we did in the contract that we had previously for 2016 to 2021, you turned it in the year prior, is that the strategy we had chosen to align ourselves to was purely coaching, and that the measurement tool we were using were the skills checklists. Well, we've made a number of adjustments to that over time. We reduced the number of skills checklists that we started with because the number that we were asking staff to do with students was just not manageable. So we got feedback from teachers. We adjust the number of skills checklists. We understood a little bit more about the funding and the per school allocation. So we added different coaching and different mechanisms to the grant. The grant is now renewable for 2021 through 2026 with new strategies and measurable outcomes. And coaching will continue to be an important strategy for us. But what we've realized with the work that Caitlin and our business office team have done is that the grant really had more room in it to use strategies that went beyond coaching for the dollars that we received for the grant. And so we went back and said, how many will this actually fund in keeping some classes in that kindergarten through 3rd grade range at 18-1, as well as pay for some coaching? And so we looked at our equity non-negotiables and really thought about this one that says we will analyze data in order to support resource allocation and funding. All district policies, procedures, and funding are aligned with our equity non-negotiables and are used to create equity for all. We know frequently that students who come from backgrounds of economic disadvantage simply need more things at school. And from an equity perspective, then we needed to realign the way we were spending those AGR dollars to be specific to the schools to which the money is intended, as well as to align to this equity non-negotiable. And we heard feedback from our staff that there are certain times where that 18-1 makes the biggest difference for them. So we used all of that. to create a new AGR philosophy, which is that up to 50% of the dollars allocated for a school can be used towards coaching, and the rest of the dollars would be used to staff some classrooms at 18-1. And that's going to vary greatly from one school to the next because the dollars come in per school. So our schools that have a higher number of students that qualify for free and reduced lunch get a much larger allocation of the AGR dollars than our schools that don't have as many students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. And you'll see that in the next slide. So this is right now in draft form because we are also following up and meeting with each one of our schools to talk about where are these dollars allocated at the school site, and then where are some of the dollars that we receive in the federal grant through Title I allocated specifically based on the number of students we have that qualify for free and reduced lunch. Where are those numbers allocated per school, and how do we make sure that align to the work we do with each school around creating a vision for that school and a school improvement plan, we're allocating the resources as best we can to meet those objectives. And so what it would do with the number of staff that we could fund using those AGR dollars would be that it changes those columns in green. And so the required sections, once we calculated back in the dollars we get from AGR and using some of that money for some classes to be 18-1, for the example that Erin gave of Franklin, would mean they actually go up a staff member. Okay, they were flat in our original projections. They go up a staff member because there are dollars associated to Franklin based on the number of children that qualify for free and reduced lunch. That would mean we'd have one section, one classroom at Franklin that would be guaranteed to stay at 18-1. Now, occasionally we have other classrooms in a school that are 18-1 because it's the average, but this would guarantee that. At Hoover, the numbers changed relatively drastically because we were at -1 and now we're up to 3 sections of each AGR and 2 additional staff members. So we were -1 and now we'd be up 2. The reason this is all in draft form is over the course of this week and next week, we're meeting with each individual school with my team and through school supports to make sure that we are, again, aligning that to that vision that each school creates. And those visioning meetings we have in the spring that are those 3-hour-long meetings where we really say, what are we trying to do? And then how do we know if we're actually doing that at each school site to be responsive to the needs of the students at that school site? So that's why this is in draft form. The other question that, of course, we are going to get is then how do you decide which teacher is the AGR teacher? And that's going to come through that visioning process. So when we look at that resource allocation based on need, then we would make a decision as a school team, like, hey, looking at our information, looking at the % of our students who are doing this or that, it's our 2nd grade class that really next year would need to be that 18-1, or it could be one of our classrooms that's an inclusionary classroom for students with disabilities. That'll be our classroom that stays 18-1. And then once we determine that classroom based on student need, then we start looking at which teacher is the right teacher to be assigned to that classroom and in that school. And that may change year to year, depending on the needs of the school and how the needs of the vision meeting that comes out of that drives what we do next.
And I'll add too that this is sustainable as long as we have AGR. So we are heading into the first year of a 5-year grant cycle. So this is sustainable each year for as long as we have AGR. Right now, that's for 5 years. And it is likely that they will renew, but we'll have to keep an eye on that each year as more word comes out from the state.
And the per pupil allocation does take a slight shift each year, but it has not been the first year that we received AGR. It was much higher than we had predicted in the budget, which started a cycle of some carryover money that then we've done our due diligence as best we could with what we had to work with to work through. And AGR actually got audited last summer, and it was through some very hard work of Jeff and Caitlin and Adam working together to ensure that we had followed all the right requirements so that we didn't have an audit finding an AGR, but it did uncover that we had more carryover money in AGR than we were comfortable with. So we're making those adjustments now to be fiscally responsible within this year, but also to allow us to adjust to this going into next year, knowing that we wouldn't have carryover money in future years to use.
So that leads us into our budget projections for 21-22. So we are headed into the first year of the state's biennial budget. So the state makes a 2-year budget, and 21-22 is the first year in that biennial budget, which means there are fewer known factors earlier in the process. So we are basing our budget right now on revenue assumptions from what DPI has requested and then what the governor has requested as well. And we will continue to base this on assumptions until the governor's budget is approved. And it's also important to note that a preliminary budget is in flux at this point in the budget cycle, and especially the first year of a biennial state budget. So here's where we can kind of tie everything together that we've been talking about. So we started talking about the revenue limit, and I love this stuff. This is fun for me. So I'm going to try to make it fun for everybody too. So we talked through inside the revenue limit. We talked about that per pupil amount. And for us, it was $10,400 and some odd dollars that we received per pupil in the revenue limit formula, that complex spreadsheet. And each year it in the state budget is either increasing, staying the same, or decreasing, as in the case of 2012 when Act 10 started. So in the past year, so from 1920 to 2021, we increased that dollar amount by $179 per the state's biennial budget. Right now, our current budget assumption is that we are using a $50 per pupil increase within the revenue limit. So inside, in that formula, a $50 per pupil increase. The governor has requested $200, and I should just start by saying the governor's requests are super fun for me to work through because it's like a dream world and they are not going to come true. We can plan the various scenarios from super conservative through all the way to what the governor has recommended. But we know that the legislator could just scrap what the governor proposed and start from scratch. So we use a conservative number here, but we also plan for what happens through the various scenarios. Our current projection uses a $50 per pupil increase. And again, the governor uses a $200 request on a per pupil revenue limit increase. If we increased to, let's say, $150, this could provide us with $300,000 in additional revenue on top of what we're currently looking at. There's also a per pupil dollar amount outside the revenue limit. And it's much easier to understand the outside the revenue limit formula because it's a simple equation. It's your per pupil amount times your membership. So this number in 2021 was $742. And so we left it the same in our preliminary budget assumptions for next year at this point. The governor's request is very interesting. It's $750, so a slight increase from this year. But he also included a piece where schools for each additional economically disadvantaged student would receive $75 per student. So when I run that, we could see if in a best case scenario, if the legislator kept that the same, in a revenue increase of $260,000 over what's currently existing. So there's a lot of room here, and these are our conservative budget assumptions, but like I said, along the way, we run the various scenarios that could come into play as we hear more from the governor and from the legislators. So additional assumptions that we make. This first one is a big one. So an increase in our special ed reimbursement rate. So the way special ed works is we have funds, expenses that take place in, we call it project number 011, which means anything that's in that bucket that we code to that account number is reimbursed from the state at a rate of about 26 to 28%, depending on the year. This governor in his proposal has requested an increase up to 45% in 21-22 and 50% reimbursement in 22-23. So special ed functions, it functions essentially at a deficit, and then whatever money is, but every year fund balance has to be zero in special ed. So it can't function at a deficit. Whatever that number is, we have to transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27 to bring that fund balance back up to zero. So that revenue equals expenses for Fund 27 for special ed. So if the special ed reimbursement rate is increased from 28% to say a 45%, that means our transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27 is much smaller. The governor asked, a state legislator asked a financial analyst to put together figures of what would the governor's proposal actually look like for school districts. And in the 45 to 50% scenario for West Allis, West Milwaukee, we could see a potentially $3 million more dollars in the special ed reimbursement, which could mean $3 million less dollars that we have to transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27, meaning $3 million more dollars to use as we see fit within Fund 10, our general fund. So again, I think this is a dream world, but this is one of those that could have a major impact on our budget. So we will absolutely keep an eye on what the state is talking about, what the legislators are talking about through that. A few other pieces that have could have impact on our budget, either in the good way or the bad way, is counting of 4K as a 1.0 FTE. So right now within our pupil count, we have to count them as a 0.5 or a 0.6 FTE, depending on the amount of hours that they attend school. So most of ours are a 0.6. And in the governor's request, it's to move those up to a 1.0. Again, that changes FTE, which we are seeing this year from last year. When you increase, you actually end up with a little bit less revenue the first year, and that evens out over time and eventually is a good thing for the school district. It equates to additional revenue. But for those first 2 or 3 years, it gets a little funky because of those fluctuations and that complex revenue limit calculation. Additional budget factors is an increase in open enrollment per pupil payment and 2/3 funding. I just have to address this one because it's kind of a hot topic with business managers. We often hear that the state wants to move towards 2/3 funding of school districts. And what that's referring to is equalization aid. Equalization aid is within the revenue limit calculation. So if our revenue limit calculation is this big, say $100 million, if state aid goes up, that's just property relief for taxpayers. So the property taxpayer portion goes down. If state aid goes down, the property tax portion goes up, but it doesn't equate to new additional dollars for school districts. It simply is taxpayer relief. So we'll talk through now the expense assumptions that we make within our budget for 21-22. So the first one here is health insurance increase of 8.5%. This one is much more fun to project this year than last year because we are in an agreement now with WEA Insurance. If you recall, when we approved the last rate increase, they also came out with a 2-year rate cap, which is incredibly helpful for budgeting purposes and potentially major cost savings. Last year at this time, we were projecting a 20% health insurance increase. So to only use an 8.5% number here is very nice. Next year, our cap is 9.9, and we could see if our loss ratio is low enough, meaning our claims to our premium ratio is low enough, we could see an increase in health insurance under 8.5%. Again, we're conservative at this point, but we are aware and plan for various scenarios. A dental insurance increase of 1.5% is used in this budget. A 4% transportation cost increase is used, which again is part of our ongoing contract with First Student that was renegotiated over the summer. We have also included a WRS increase. So this is a benefit that the school district pays, and also the employee pays the same amount. In this current year is 6.75%. So we've increased that to 6.85% as preliminary budget assumptions. We also have a new expense of crossing guards projected for 21-22. I shouldn't say projected, it's going to happen, but we're just working through the RFP at this point. So the exact dollar amount, we're planning for about $150,000. Previously, the city funded the crossing guards. So that this year is the last year that the city is funding that, and that expense is moving to our school district. We also have preliminary budget factors in here of salary and benefit addition. So we have a 1.23% CPI salary increase, and the asterisks there reflect the actual established rate. So that is the actual rate for 21-22. Although working through the compensation model, all these pieces kind of go together, these salary pieces. We also have additional $1 million towards the compensation model as a preliminary earmark for, we keep talking about we need to move up to the average in the area for teacher salaries. And the only way to do that is to add additional funds towards compensation. So at this preliminary point in the budget and in the compensation model discussions, we have $1 million earmarked for the compensation model. We also are reflecting an increase in our net open enrollment expense. So when we have students that go out of our school district, so they open enroll out, we pay a dollar amount to that school district. And when a student open enrolls in, we receive money for that student. So we are projecting that expense to be greater than it was in the past, just based on current trends. And then finally, this budget also reflects that the school budgets based on our internal formula are back up to 100%. So you'll recall that in this year, with the unknowns due to COVID, they're at 75%. So this projection for next year just brings them back up to 100. And Deidre will make fun of me because I love a good meme and a slide, but this one was worthy. So an incredible milestone that we've reached is we no longer have to plan for fund balance restoration. So previously we had been earmarking $500,000 from basically money that we don't spend in our budget that goes unspent, that increases our fund balance up to our goal of 20%. And as our auditors worked through with us at a previous workshop just a month ago, that we have met that goal and we're at about 24%. The goal of fund balance is for a school district to not have to short-term borrow. So revenue comes in only at certain time periods during the year, but expenses happen every single month, payroll and invoices every single month. So because those two things don't line up, in order to not have to short-term borrow for cash flow purposes, a school district has to have enough money in their fund balance so that they can continue with regular operations. Short-term borrowing is not a terrible thing, but it does come with an interest expense. So by not having to short-term borrow, we save those funds and not having to pay that interest. So this is a major milestone for us. It's money that is going right back into the classrooms rather than just building up our fund balance.
I would like it noted for the record, I don't make fun of you for using the memes. Let's say it's very difficult for us to understand other budget presentations that don't have memes.
Yeah, they're not as fun.
They're nowhere near
drier
if you don't put memes in them.
We'll have to make that a board policy that all budget presentations must include memes.
We'll get the opportunity to talk about that later on tonight.
My favorite is that this one is called Success Kids. So I just thought it made sense. So with all of those assumptions, boiling down our projected budget, currently at this point, very early in the process, we're looking at a deficit of about $3 million. There are many factors that will continue to change. And I guess let's start with how did we get there? What changed from 2021, our current year, to 21-22? Our revenue, non-grant revenue. So our revenue from our revenue limit formula is decreasing by about $1.7 million. And like I said, at the beginning, the theme of this whole presentation was the wacky things that COVID did to us. And one of those is additional revenue in 2021 and a reduction in revenue in 21-22 because of those key factors in the revenue limit formula. And then we also have increasing expenses. We talked about CPI, we talked about health insurance, transportation, and those things are going to keep going up year after year. So we have to work through strategies to make sure that we can support our costs every single year. And part of the benefit of having a fund balance at such a healthy, sustainable level is that we can plan long-term. So some of those items now that we're working through to develop a balanced budget are narrowing in on staffing costs. So one of those components is this AGR strategy. So we'll really focus in on now who are the staff members that are in the regular Fund 10 budget and who's funded with AGR dollars. And that really doesn't matter to the individual teacher. It's more so, okay, what are the actual costs? Because right now we're using projections. We'll keep a close eye on the state budget updates because, like I said, it was kind of fun to run the scenarios because I think they are a dream world. So we'll make sure that we keep an eye to what the legislators are talking through because they're not going to be as beautiful as Governor Evers has laid out in his request. We will work through the strategic plan of our 2021 current year budget reallocation. So whether that's a transfer to a capital improvement fund, our Fund 46, we talked through in our Financial Stability and Efficiency Committee, potentially using a Fund 73 for retirement. So we don't have a Fund 73, we have to open a trust. So that's a piece that we're working through. But all of those pieces are the fun part of being able to plan long-term and not just year after year, like figure out how we're going to do it. So we're working through that as a business office, as a administrative team, and within our finance committee throughout the months to come. And then finally identifying our priority items to support within 21-22 to achieve our goals. And I believe that is the last slide. So with that, I can take any questions. And there's no action item tonight, it's just the budget update.
Gary?
So I think it's going to be slide 24, which has the AGR adjustment to the enrollment and staffing spreadsheet. I'm going to walk through two schools and then get to something I'd like to see with this spreadsheet. So let's go with Longfellow and Pershing.
Would it be helpful if I pulled it back up?
Yeah, for others, I've got it pulled up myself on my slide.
You wouldn't mind, Caitlin, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, but yeah, pull it back up. So, okay, let's walk through Longfellow and Pershing as the example. So both start out with, similar projections. The third Friday in September count is exactly the same. The projected roll-up is a little bit slightly higher for Pershing than Longfellow. So you get to the required sections, 8 for Longfellow, 9 for Pershing. And then we move over to the AGR part of it. So under the AGR piece, Longfellow has 2 AGR sections. So then they have a -1 staff reduction. Pershing has 0 AGR sections, so they have that -1. So a school that's going to have more students is going to have less staff under the AGR. So I'd like to see our two things. One, the free and reduced numbers in each school, and then how the free and reduced number is used in the formula to give Longfellow the 2 sections of AGR that Pershing doesn't have. I don't expect an answer now, but I would maybe like to see that detail added to this spreadsheet for all the schools.
And Gary, I can actually answer that one right now. It's because of how it currently is allocated, what % of the coaching at that particular school. So Pershing has more coaching. They have more reading specialists and a deeper learning coach and an innovation coach as their split, whereas Longfellow has less coaching than that right now. So that's when we say that these are draft numbers, that's what we have to go back to each school and talk about, right? Is this a school where we want to adjust the amount of coaching that's being paid for with AGR, which may shift these numbers to be more even across schools? Because the % of students that qualify for free and reduced lunch at both of those schools is similar. Pershing is actually a little bit higher, but there is a higher number of coaches at Pershing. That's been part of the work that's just been done at Pershing. Okay. That looks a little different than the work at Longfellow. And then some of the coaches at Pershing are actually then are reading specialists, and some of those are also paid for by their title allocation. So that's what explains the difference in some of these numbers, is how much coaching the school actually has. So Jefferson and Man would be another one that's comparable. And we have 2 coaches, 2 full-time coaches at both of those schools, but more of that coaching has historically been allocated to AGR for Jefferson than it had been at Man, because some of their coaches are paid for by other funding sources. So that's exactly why you see that discrepancy, is because of how much of it is allocated toward coaching now, which was a big part of our discussion, to say, then we have to set kind of a norm around that, because it wouldn't be an inequity formula, right? You wouldn't say our highest poverty schools would have fewer of those sections simply because historically the money was used to pay for some of the coaching, but yet the coaching is very important to the work that we're trying to do. And it has a very high efficacy rate on increasing student achievement. So therefore, we want to keep that, but we've got to moderate it a little bit better so that those numbers start to make a little bit more sense, and then shift around what's paid for out of title versus what's paid for out of AGR to make those adjustments.
Okay.
I know Jeff had his hand up too. I can't see him anymore, but I know he's there.
Yes, I did. I just have a comment. Caitlin, I have to tell you, of my years on the board, my favorite all-time PowerPoint slide was the, the general fund. That was like, wow. Great. Thank you so much. Fund balance one, and that's the best. I might take that and just print it out and frame it. That was very, very, you made my night.
Well, it's been a long evening, so for you to say that at 9:15 is impressive.
Thank you. That's all the work you've done to get us there. You and Marty and the whole team, just super.
Thank you. It's a team effort. Can't take all the credit. Well, and that's honestly, the AGR conversations have been fun, for lack of a better word, because it's such a team effort. Like, we get all the brains in the room and figure out what's the best way to do this to support our kids. Like, that's the ultimate goal. How can we best get these dollars in the classrooms?
And that one was a super exciting collaboration because it led us right back to those equity non-negotiables. And we've been challenging our leaders a lot to say, where are you living these? And where have you maybe missed an opportunity to live one that you can reflect on? And for us as a team, you know, parts of our teams working together, Caitlin and myself, it was a real moment to say, wait a minute, the way we've previously allocated those dollars was not necessarily living that equity non-negotiable. And so we get the opportunity to make a change. So we're reflecting on that and then doing that in a different way. That's our way to live those beliefs.
I don't know what slide it was on, Caitlin, but I just wanted to clarify and make sure I heard you correctly, that our open enrollment numbers out of our district are trending up still?
Yes. So our open enrollment out continues to trend up, and our open enrollment in continues to trend down. So using the same trend history, that number gets a little bit bigger each year. I don't have the dollars in front of me.
That's not good. We need to put a plan around how do we stop that.
Yep.
Thank you for agreeing. Yep.
Yeah, we've seen, I just pulled it up while you were talking. Sorry for the delay. Our open enrollment in is trending down. It's the decline is the gradient is very low. I mean, last 2019 we had 761 actively open enrolled in. This year it's 740, so 20 students. It's normal to see fluctuation, but you know, to speak to your point and what Caitlin alluded to, our open enrollment out has increased. It's hard to know. We went up 200 students this year. It's hard to know what that is in relation to, you know, given the school year that we've had. But I do agree. You know, we need to look at, kind of get some information on why that might be.
Thank you, Erin. Appreciate it.
And that's also been something that we've discussed at the FACT team as well. Like, is there some issues with the way our buildings are structured or the amenities that other districts have the ability to offer that impacts that decision as well? So that's been a discussion a bit at our FACT team as well.
Other questions or comments from the presentation? Noah?
I just want to make a note about the open enrollment out, open enrollment in. You know, this year's probably a poor year to compare things to, because we do know that a lot of people left our district just because they were finding any district that had in-person learning that would take them. And, you know, I'm actually interested to see now that we're moving back into in-person learning, you know, mostly 100%, if we start seeing some of those people come back even this year still, because they just didn't want to do virtual or whatever reason, then they left. Another thing about our open enrollment in is, if you remember historically, this district used to just take as many people as would apply, and we would then pay for more teachers to supply that many open enrollment seats, which is part of the problem that we got into. And we moved away from that practice and made sure that we're only, opening up as many seats as we actually needed to fill current classrooms in our district. And so I would expect to see a decline in open enrollment as those previous students continue to move out and graduate from our district, that those numbers would go down. So I'm not surprised by that at all. And as we continue to hopefully stabilize our population, that open enrollment number should start to become, well, it seems already to be becoming quite stable as far as fluctuations by 20 or a couple tens of students a year. I don't think is a big deal. So really it's about the open enrollment out. Having the charter virtual school that we're looking at doing might help with some of that. And also continuing on with our deeper learning practices and looking at possibly, looking at schools and their identities that they want to have as language immersions or Montessori or, STEM schools, I think also will help to bring back or actually attract people to the district, because that's the sorts of things that they're going to go to or are going to, like what they have in MPS and things like that.
And Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention two other variables that impact open enrollment in and out, just as long as we're kind of looking at those real quick. So it's the combination of right-sizing our staff, having that 92% fill rate, and declining enrollment. Okay, so when you have your staff right-sized and declining enrollment, that causes your open enrollment numbers to potentially bump up. If you have increasing enrollment and a right-sizing staff, you're going to see your open enrollment numbers go down a little bit. So that can be a variable, and we know what our trends are there. And then another one that impacts us is just movement, transiency, people moving from location to location. When people move into town, they don't always decide to move to our school district because it can be disruptive. And maybe if you're not going to be here for an extended period of time, or if that's the plan, or you think that might happen, you might choose to leave your kids where they are because, it's for a period of time. So there are a couple other variables that are often difficult to predict, but do impact open enrollment.
We are a unique community, that is for sure. Right. Any other comments? I'm sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Co-curriculars plays a role as well.
Yeah.
For family. I know 5 families that have left our district based on those alone, so glad we're going to address that.
That's a good point too. All those things that we've been talking about in committee and then at workshops and stuff. You're right. Everything, all those things tie together. All right. Any other comments? Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin and Aaron and team and Jeff, for putting all that together. It's a lot of work, and Deidre and your group and everybody else for working on that. It's a lot of work. And obviously we know it's a constantly evolving process, as you said, living, breathing, right? All of those things. So thank you very much for that. We are going to have like an interesting little transition this evening, because we are going to be moving into what will be called the committee of the whole as a board, so that we can go ahead and discuss the Neola policies for the administrative level policies. So there's a procedure that we'll have to follow to do that.
Can I move that we take a 5-minute break before we go into the policies?
Sure, we can do 5 minutes. Okay, so first what we have to do is we have to adjourn the regular meeting. So we'll need a motion and a second to adjourn, and then we'll come back and we'll come back, and then we will we'll reconvene as committee of the whole, roll call, and then we will go through the Neola policies. We'll take a 5-minute break. So we need a motion and a second. Motion.
Second.
Second, moved and seconded. So we are all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute recess and then reconvene as a committee of the whole. So it's 9:24.
And we're still on this website, right?
Still on this website. We're not changing meetings. We're staying right here. So we'll reconvene at 9:29. Okay, so we did verify the procedure for this to make sure that we do it right. So bear with us. This is a little bit more unusual. So, okay, so we are going to look for a motion and a second to reconvene as a committee of the whole. And once we have that, then we will do roll call.
So move.
Second.
Moved and seconded to move into the committee of the whole. Suzette, if we could do roll, please.
Mr. Sikich?
Present.
Mr. Schultz?
Present.
Mr. Lee?
Here.
Mr. Eustruck?
Here.
Mrs. Justin is excused. Ms. Klug?
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser is excused. Mr. Keller?
Here.
President Emmons?
Here. All right, so we're going to go into the Neola policies for bylaws and administration. I will turn over to Dr. Lexman to start the conversation.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for all of the thoughtful and hard work tonight. It's a lot. And what we want to do with this is essentially the same work you've already been doing in the various committees as you've gone through Neola policies that are tied to specific committees, with each of the directors. And there's a set of policies that are, these are all pretty common and typical. So there's a set of bylaws for a school board always, and then there's a set of administration policies. And there's not a committee that they're obviously associated with. And right, so Stephanie and I reviewed at least the bylaw side of it, or did we do the administrative side too, or just the bylaws?
Bylaws.
Yeah, that's what I remember. That was a while ago. As a start, but under current policy, right? Our current policy is that a new policy gets reviewed and then held after a first reading in committee for 30 days, right? And so this is what then working with Dan Vliet, he advised that the board has in current policy a structure to go into a committee of the whole. So now we're in a committee to do the work on these particular policies. And we'll use the same kind of process as you used in the other committees, which is we'll start with the bylaws. And if there are questions, thoughts on specific policies, and raise that, we'll go to that particular policy. Beth is prepared to capture any notes or questions that board members may have. We probably don't have all the answers tonight, just like in committee. And because some of the questions need to go back to Richard, right, our Neola representative, to get some input on why something is the way it is, or is it required to be that way? Can we modify it? So we want to capture that conversation as best we can. Knowing that, like I said in Friday Notes, it's not a time to start, wordsmithing deeply. I think we, just like we did, we take it back. If it makes sense, we make some adjustments, we bring it back in the second reading. So that's a little bit of the setup of this. So any questions just about the process that we're using right now? Okay, so then we'll go to, we're in the bylaws, and it's, it's linked in the agenda, so you can pull them right up. So questions, thoughts about specific bylaws?
There were a couple of policies. I think it's 0111 and 0112, where it's not, no, sorry, just 0111, where, and I think there's another one later that doesn't list at all for the district. So we want to make sure that that's consistent because it is listed as at all in other policies where the district is named.
Mm-hmm.
So for consistency's sake, we want to make sure that that is accurate.
Okay. So Beth, you got that one? Just nod along. Okay. Yeah, I see Jeff.
Not really a question or anything, but like some of the last stuff that we've sent out as a district doesn't include the et al, and that is our name. West Allis, West Milwaukee, et al. Yeah,
it really is. It's a little bit of a, a communication kind of dynamic. When you start using West Allis, West Milwaukee et al., people start to get confused. And what does that mean? It has to be used on kind of really legal documents, those kind of things, because that is the legal name. But in trying to communicate kind of who we are in a brand, the kind of language at all doesn't go very well with a brand. And so that's why we try to balance that, but always have to use it in, legal documents, contracts, those kind of pieces.
And that could be it. Just, being here forever, et al. Is
right. It is part of the legal name, and it is part of our response even to the whole New Berlin resident that wanted to detach, right? Et al. And others, it captures the rest of us, right?
And don't forget Greenfield.
Right.
Just wanted to bring that to anybody's attention.
Yep, thanks. So other bylaws.
I wrote notes on various pieces of paper, so I'm trying to find.
Oh, you got to pay. Okay.
Where I had my notes.
Really, you went old school?
No, when you have access to a big copier, sometimes you just have to take advantage of it. So.
I like it.
I do have one question. In policy 0112, we do have some 3-year-old kindergarten students currently, correct?
Yes, and Deidre, are those under the school district or under recreation?
Well, recreation has a program, and then as a school district, we have a program that's only eligible to students with special needs. So those are kids in our early childhood program who come for a 3-year-old kindergarten.
So then, Beth, capture this. I think this is a Richard question. Given that does that show up somewhere else, or does this need to be? My guess is, Christine, you're asking the right question. This probably should say 3-year-old program and 4-year-old kindergarten through grade 12 or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, and do we have to include anything about 18 to 21 as well? Is that separate?
Oh, true.
They're identified in the student information system as 12th graders still. That's how the state accounts for them until they graduate at 21. So that's why policy usually doesn't include them as a separate entity. Right. Some years you may not have. I mean, we've never had a year where we didn't have an active 18 to 21-year-old program or 3-year-old program. But if you were a much smaller district, you could have a year where you didn't have any of those programs because you just didn't have any students who were identified for them.
My next question is on 0144.1 on the compensation policy. So one of the paragraphs is on the health and dental insurance benefit and about the board members who were on before 2000, and now we don't have anybody. So can that be removed since we won't ever go back to a section where we have board members who have been on the board prior to 2000?
So that's one that I jumped on earlier today, sent it back to Suzette and Beth. But if you look through it, I think leaving it makes sense because it is an option for board members if they choose it, but then as board members, you pay for it. All right. So that's included, that it's at the board. I forget the exact language, if it's at board member expense or whatever it states, but that's included in there. So you all can participate in the insurance plans, but it's not free.
Okay, it makes sense for that with that caveat. Would the district ever and the board ever consider having a secretary that is not a board member? That's one of the listings under the policy 0152. I don't know if that's standard across school boards across the state, but it says the board shall also elect a board secretary who may not be a member of the board. Historically, to my knowledge, our secretary has always been an active board member. So I don't know if that needs to change or if that needs to stay because that's the legalese of it. But in our circumstance, ours would be a board member that would fill the secretary role.
That was 0152?
Yes. It's officers.
So does it say shall or may?
It says the board shall also elect a board secretary who may not be a member of the board. Again, if that needs to stay because of the legalese of it, but historically, to my knowledge, the board secretary elected has always been a board member.
Yeah, let's find out. That's a Richard question. If there's some advantage there. If not, then I think we should align it to our practice.
Yeah, and if you read the duties of the secretary in the other parts, there's quite a range of things that really Suzette does.
Right.
I didn't know if we should be electing Suzette as the secretary of the board, because she does the vast majority of the duties that are listed underneath board secretary.
Yeah, so we're kind of just talking about over here too, that's part of the reason, but I just didn't know the distinction, because the board actually has a secretary position in addition to the work that is unique to Suzette's role. So it's probably a good Richard clarification question. How does that need to be determined and distinguished so that we make sure that we then have the right, if we have a board secretary that's an elected position, that all those right descriptions are provided, which is separate from the role of, you know, Suzette's position to assist the board. So.
Yeah, are we unique in that, or is that like just standard school board legalese for Wisconsin?
Well, Suzette says we're unique in that role, so.
Oh, okay.
Well,
definitely some Richard stuff.
If I can just comment quick. Beth, do you remember that Neola did not have a secretary policy? And then we talked to Richard about that, and he said we could certainly add one, and that's what we did. But that's the reason for the language, just like you were saying, Noah, is because the executive assistant to the board or the administrative assistant is usually the secretary. So that's why the policy is written that way, the Neola policy. But yeah, we can talk to Richard about it some more.
Yeah, because the board has a separate secretary. But in my last two districts, it was the executive assistant to the board and the superintendent. So exactly what we have.
Right.
There's not a separate board secretary as an elected position.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Other districts.
Other districts have a board secretary. That's like a officer.
Right.
And we do too.
Okay.
And that's why we added that policy, but we could take it away. We could remove that.
No, my question is, do they? Are we unique in having a board elected officer as a secretary? Or do other boards also have that? It's a question I don't know the answer to. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, we'll definitely ask Richard that question. He'll have a better idea on that.
Okay. Anything else in your notes, Stephanie?
A couple of questions on the specific responsibilities of the board treasurer. Seemed very staff affiliated as opposed to board guidance. So just maybe some clarification on that, because I'm not sure if our board treasurer is currently immediately upon receipt depositing district funds. I'm assuming that's not happening on a regular basis.
Every Friday. I mean, it's the bank lines are
bank to the drive-through, right?
Horrible.
Yeah.
COVID didn't.
So, Stephanie, could I get the number again?
Yep. That one is 0171.4.
And your question is?
The specific responsibilities of the board treasurer. Our board elected officers are more guidance and governance and than actual implementation. And this particular policy reads as if the treasurer is going to the bank and writing checks and paying bills and stuff. And that's a little different than how we're currently set up. So just to get some clarification, do we need to make a policy regarding that position that's more specific to us?
I was just delegating all that to Caitlin. I thought that was what.
Yep, and that's probably wondered whether or not that's just a simple language change, that whether it's the governance of the delegation comes with that. And there really isn't anything about delegating. It's like you go to the bank and you make deposits. I'm like, I'm not sure we won't.
No, it's a good one to make sure it's cleaned up. Yep.
Right? Are we doing it wrong? And I think I think a couple pages left. The board policy, the current board policy that we have for legal counsel, is a little bit more descriptive than the legal counsel policy that Neola provided, and that's 0172. And I didn't know, again, because this is Neola, whether it should be more generic than what we currently have, because ours provides a little bit more guidance and sort of some of the thought process behind counseling counsel. And I kind of like our policy a little better, but again, know that there's reasons why you'd go with a specific Neola one. But I kind of wanted that one explored to determine, are we hurting ourselves by having a more detailed policy or not?
Okay.
I'll look that over in relation to the administrative guidelines.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks,
That we'll get, that may have some of that detail.
That's all I have for that particular section. If other people have comments, Gary?
Just, this might be picky, but 0115 on the official address. Since we no longer own the building, should we say administration building or administration offices?
Yeah, so that's a Richard question, right? Because that's probably a unique circumstance.
That's a good
where
point,
we're
Gary.
renting. Yeah. So what was the number again, Gary?
0115.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yep, Beth got it.
Anything else on the bylaws?
Just on that note, if we moved buildings, then we would have to approve that policy, essentially, the new address.
Correct.
And a whole bunch of other stuff. Sure. Oh, cool. Anything else with regards to bylaws? If not, we'll move on to administration policies. All right. Let your notes.
Okay.
Anybody have commentary on the administration policies, 1000s? There's a lot less pages to print for this one. Okay, policy 1230 is the responsibility of the superintendent. Duties and responsibilities, section A. I'm suggesting a change for keep the board informed of school operations by preparing regular board agendas as opposed to monthly board agendas, because ours are not monthly only, but we do have them regularly. So I thought monthly or regular might be a better choice for that, because that's generic enough too, that gives us some leeway.
Yeah, because the requirement of boards is to have at least one meeting per month. But you're right. Yeah, we do two.
But regular, because that could still be monthly, but it oftentimes is not.
But is regular specific enough then? If the requirement is once a month, is regular specific enough to really address that?
Well, the minimum requirement for a board is school board has to have a regular meeting once a month in public.
Correct.
And we do two. So I'm not sure what the right word is.
That's a good Richard question. That's why I kind of brought that up as a suggestion, because again, we do have meetings more frequently than that on a regular basis. So I think it's worth just at least asking. With regards to policy 1240, the current board policy, this is in regards to this evaluation of the superintendent. The current board policy of the district includes the calendar of the timeline for that. Is that something that we have to worry about not having, or is it better to have it just the outline of what is required and then on an annual basis, biannual basis, determine the timeline? Otherwise, sometimes we wind up being handcuffed and not being able to follow the timeline due to certain circumstances. Is that worse to have a timeline, or do you keep everybody more accountable by having a timeline?
Yeah, it can work both ways, and I could see it changing over time as boards evolve, right? So different board members come on, and some of you decide it's time to leave, and different board members have different priorities related to the evaluation of the superintendent. So leaving it a little more open is a little more flexible in that regard. But your point about, is there something that holds us to a timeline? mean, that really, I think that really falls into right now this board's prerogative.
I think that's a good Richard question too, just to kind of
Okay.
ask again. We don't want to be so far away from what other districts are doing.
Right.
So there's, and they may also have best practices that there is no timeline, but, and here's sort of, you know, the guiding principles for that and how to kind of stick to that, or how other boards have adopted that. That might be beneficial to this board as well.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions or comments on the administration policy?
Oh, I just saw Deidre. You waved your hand. Oh.
Not waving my hand.
Okay.
Great. Almost to the end here. All right. A lot of that was very legally, so there's a lot of things you can't change or shouldn't change.
Right.
So
Right. It's pretty standard, and TOSA
So
adopted.
Stephanie, did you said the evaluation, including that timeline, do we have to have the timeline? Was that your last one or was there one more?
that was
it?
the last one.
Yeah.
The
right,
1240.
Right, and it's really what better practice is the question.
So we're going to continue through this list and get resolution. I'm working with Richard and some that we can just make the change ourselves. For example, et al. And adding, 3-year-old program.
Yep. Yeah, that's the idea. And so what, depending on how Richard responds, and this is not a lot to follow up on, so that's, I think puts us in a good position, because we're going to be moving the majority of the policies that all of you have been working on, the second reading on March 22nd. So it's going to be a big sweep of all the new policies, and we think it strategically makes sense that we try to make as full of a shift over to the new platform all at once as possible. But that means these policies would not have been held in committee for 30 days. So if we get the answers and it feels like it makes sense, we may come forward with these asking you to waive the current policy. So we don't have to hold them for 30 days. And that's not uncommon for boards to do that, because then it allows us to move the first set of policies with everything else.
Are all the other sections ready for second reading then on the 22nd?
All except those, I think, tied to recreation. That's one we still got to double check on where we are with that.
Okay. So there is still an item on the committee agenda for the evening about approving as a first reading tonight. Do we have to do that?
Yes, you need a motion to approve the first reading.
Okay. Before we do that, are there any other questions or comments or suggestions on the bylaw section or the administration section?
I don't have a question on either one of those, but we did not take formal action to approve first reads at our committee. Did you, Caitlin, did you guys?
I didn't think we could.
No, we did not.
No. So that's just a question about the process going forward, is we did not take a formal action to approve them as a first reading committee.
Okay, so this will be a Dan Vliet question.
Okay.
What to do with
I was
that?
going to say, that's beyond the parliamentarian.
Right, that's beyond all. I was like, now what do we
It's
do?
beyond everyone at 9:53.
I play a lawyer, but I'm not really one.
But yeah, all of a sudden when you just said that we have to do that here, I thought, I did not do that in our committee.
Okay.
I didn't think that we could.
I didn't think we could approve something in a committee.
And specifically
No.
the policies that are in here, it states that committees cannot take action. So
Okay.
Well,
So
that differs from what our current policy is.
Right, committees can't take action that is on behalf of the board, right? So they can't bind the board.
Oh, but they can take action to bring it to the board for approval.
Right.
Right. But if we're approving a first reading within a committee, is that not binding to the board?
No, because the second reading would then be with the full board. It's out of committee then.
I would think so, but I still like your idea of talking to Dan.
Yeah.
I think so too. Yeah.
Well, and even if you can't do it in committee, which is sort of what I assumed, then do we have to do that as a full board? Should we have brought them all forward for approval as a first read is the question then?
Then we'd have to do that on March 22nd and then have to wait 2 weeks and do the first week in or first meeting in April to actually approve them.
Or would we have to wait the 2 weeks, or can we waive the 30 days? And we've done that before.
And
Waive
that before too.
Right.
30 days and then done them that same night. So that would be another way to do that. But I think if this is how we're doing these, then there is
I would feel more comfortable
than how we
Dan
did the other
giving
ones.
us the okay that what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we'll figure this out. I mean, this is, it's one of those things you do once as a school board when you're doing a big policy adjustment. So it's not like you got to remember the rules 4 years from now. You're not doing this again.
Right. Hopefully.
Right.
I'm not.
I'm not.
So, I don't want you guys. But...
Stephanie certainly is not.
Does the public have to have a opportunity to review these? It's a lot of stuff, right? So is this available publicly? Will it be available? I mean, it will be available when we approve it, but before that, in case someone's like, I want to see what the policy is on blah, 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 that you're going to be approving ahead of time. So not like you have, 2,000 pages of documents I'm supposed to review in, the 3 days that I get a notification that it's going to be on the board agenda, for Joe Schmo public. I don't know.
Yeah, that's
I don't know, but my guess would be that they have the right to read it like we did.
So how much time, I guess? I mean, what's reasonable for someone to? Is a week okay? I'm just saying, do we need to put these out there if we're going to approve them on March 22nd earlier than that, and somehow make a notification that this is what's going to be happening? So if someone does have a vested interest, they're not like, I didn't have enough time to review it. I don't think this is fair, and then we have a problem.
If you're talking to Dan, ask him that question.
Right. Right. Because if we're going to do the kind of what.
Because we can't make it.
Right. If you suggesting we would waive the 30-day for all of it on March 22nd, then this week we probably want to do a communication about this whole project. And here's all of the current drafts of the new policies that you can access.
Yeah, that's what I'm pointing to. Will anyone do it? Probably not. But then it's out there, and they have had the opportunity.
Right. We're
that combines that we did notice committees and said specifically, these are the policies we're discussing. So those were also open to the public. So just including that in the communication, that there's been no attempt the goal wasn't to keep anything like a big secret or whatever and spring it on people, that there were opportunities throughout to give feedback. And then this would be another one.
Exactly.
Go ahead. A quick question on policy 1400. The second paragraph says the job description of the superintendent shall be included in the board policy manual. I don't know if it's late because I've been in meetings for 5 hours, but what is the board policy manual? Is there a Neola policy that defines board policy manual? Or what's in it?
Yeah, Beth, you're muted.
But
you just
the board policy manual will be, at least I believe it will be the Neola. It's the board docs right now. It's the manual of our policies.
So it's all of the policies.
Yeah.
Policies.
And we used to have a physical 3-ring binder, but it's still a manual. It's just an online manual. Remember that?
Still have one.
Right.
That still uses theirs.
I have one still.
In my museum.
In my filing
museum at home.
Here.
Yep.
Oh, hate it.
Save that, Noah. You might want to donate it to the West Ellis Historical Society.
I had to keep, because Suzette would print off new policies when they approved them. You had to replace those that we approved.
Yep. And your binder.
Yep.
So then in this policy of job descriptions, does it state all the job description of the superintendent in that policy then?
But I thought that was one of the policies in here.
It is, yeah. It lists it's a long one. It's several pages long of all the
Right.
things the superintendent's
Oh,
supposed to do.
sorry, it's 14. Oh, like I said, it's been 5 hours. It's 0.01.
Yeah, and when I read it, it scares me a little bit.
I'm sorry.
So from a logistical question, and Beth, you might know this, so in that policy 1400, where in the second paragraph it says the job description of the superintendent shall be included in the board policy manual, does that then link back to like the main page of all the policies, which would be the board policy manual? Because then it would kind of be circular to say, what's the board policy manual on this? And it takes you to the page and it says board policy manual. And then you know that that's where you are. Is that kind of how these will work?
Well, Richard question, right? Are there internal links?
The cross-reference, right?
Right.
Because I think that makes it a much more user-friendly tool if that I mean, you have to make sure that everything continuously points to the right place, but I would assume you wouldn't be redirecting a lot of these things very often. Most of these are going to be internal into the policy, which isn't going to be adjusted very, very often. So I guess for Christine's point, if you don't know what the board policy manual is, you might spend an hour trying to search and find it. And if it just links directly to that main page, that would just kind of answer that question. So
yeah, it's
You
kind
should
of
name it.
yeah, and it's kind of Beth. The question is also, will like the state statutes be active links? Will references to other board policies be active links? Kind of internal to the whole system.
I would love it if the statutes were linked. I think that'd be so helpful to be able to just kind of click on that and have it take you where you need to go for that. All right. So are we going to be approving the first reading of these?
That's what we noticed.
So we would look for a motion and a second to approve these as first reading for bylaws and administration.
So moved.
Second.
Jeff?
Just a question. Can we do this without getting the answers to some of the questions we asked about?
Yep. Yeah, that's the purpose of a first reading and holding it. Get the answer.
I'm good with that. Thank you.
So it's been moved and seconded. Any additional comments or questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. So we've got obviously some more work to do on that. We'll look for some clarification on these other points about approval and review and timelines and some of the other questions. And we'll just keep going from there, but we're getting near the finish line, guys. We're almost there. We've been working hard on this for a long time. So you guys have been doing great work to kind of get there. So thank you. We're almost there. See the fruits of the labor. All right, we would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, everybody.